It's Tuesday, March 28th, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.
Hello, and welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast. I am once again your co-host, Chris, back. I decided the West Coast wasn't for me, but I'm still joined by my other co-host, Mike Shalau. What's up, dude?
Nothing, man.
How you been?
Stressed, man. Like
Two solo
with
shows.
You not being here,
I know.
I was completely lost.
I can only imagine.
I wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you're back.
How'd the? I listened to the first show. I haven't heard the second one yet. Everything cool with that one?
Both were train wrecks, as far as I remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But par for the course.
All right. Got it. So don't expect anything odd with the second one. Just a normal show.
Normal
right?
show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Show you that these people have already heard at this point if they're listening to this one.
Yes.
Normal show.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to be back.
Yeah, you look good. You look tan.
Thanks. Yeah. It was rainy almost the entire time.
Yeah.
So,
nice.
Yeah. Some nice California rain. I have family in San Diego. 3 cousins and a bunch of little nieces and nephews and stuff like that. And none of them own a umbrella. Don't own them.
Wow.
Doesn't rain.
I don't own an umbrella either, but that's because I hate umbrellas.
Yeah. You don't own an umbrella? Mm-hmm. Really?
No.
Well, maybe it's not as weird as that. I thought it was very odd that it was raining and they just didn't really know what to do.
Let's go hoods.
Okay. Yeah. They had one of them had a rain jacket, but it looked like the old seafood shanty guy. It was like a huge rubber
It was more
hooded,
for the aesthetic than for
like
the
Paddington Bear, or that whatever.
Sure.
That kind of like big old.
Nice.
It was kind of funny.
It's a good vibe.
Yeah, but it's good to be back here at Beer Temple. Got Serge here. Little weird thing going on the mic, Serge. You hearing that little? It's like a weird little. Okay, that's what it is. As you guys all heard Serge say.
Point to his headphones
Yeah.
and say, "It's your headphones."
Yeah. I have crappy headphones on.
Because we have so many great guests
Yes.
today.
Nice segue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, we got a special show, one we've been planning for a bit. It's going to be a kind of a specialty episode. Mm-hmm. What are we going to... a specialty of yours, too.
Not anymore.
Well,
At one point, maybe.
More so than 99.9% of the people
Sure.
out there.
Yeah. The rest of them are here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we going to be talking
We're
about?
talking about barrel-aging beers. Specifically for this one, spirit barrel-aged beers.
Yes, right.
Sweets.
And not wild.
Not
right?
wild.
Yeah.
That might be a different show.
Yes.
Maybe.
Maybe we'll do a different
see.
one. Yeah. Yeah, so we got some heavy hitters in the Chicago barrel aging scene. Some may think it's B level. I think they're A level, personally. Some
Yeah.
may think it's B level.
I don't care what those people are saying.
I don't care. I disagree with all those people
Yeah,
out there.
me too. I wish they would stop saying that.
I do too, but they won't.
I'm glad you brought it up.
They won't stop saying
Yeah,
it.
they will not stop
Yeah.
saying it. You guys have to prove them wrong with your performance on this podcast, I guess.
Yeah, so the pressure's on them.
Mm-hmm. That's what we like to do here, put a lot of pressure on the guests.
Yeah, that's what I like to do. I can't see, so let me put on my glasses now. And I'll read the outline of what you said we're going to be doing. It's going to be a free-flowing conversation. That's what you said, Mike.
I didn't think you were going to read it word for word.
Well, I asked if you wanted to lead in, and you said I should. So, but I think we should probably just kind of get right into it. And I'll just say from the get-go how awesome it is to have this level of talent here in one room. It's super. I'm excited. Mm-hmm. And two, no pressure, but I'm going to rely on you to steer this conversation since you've actually done this stuff before.
All right.
Okay.
Sure.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah.
But one thing that isn't going to be any different than any other show is we introduce guests by order of seniority. Okay.
We didn't do that on the last show I hosted because I forgot who came with them. So I just went from left to right.
Okay. Well, don't worry. I'm back,
We're back,
everyone. Yeah.
It was chaos.
Yes.
Train wreck, as I said.
Yeah, train wreck. So, by seniority, that being how many times you've been on the show, which is the only seniority that I care about.
That's right.
So I already introduced you and myself and Serge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Champions.
Mm-hmm. And this 3 people who've been on the most.
Yeah. Edmar might still have me, actually.
Yeah, Edmar. Well, maybe I should just mention him. But after that, it's we have Mr. Mike Siegel of Goose Island. What's up, man? How are you?
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. Good to have you on.
I brought the gravel.
Yeah,
I'm
you
like
got
a
a
young
voice
Nick
for radio.
Nolte going on over here.
Nice.
Exactly. What's up?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. What's new?
Well, ready to talk about barrels?
Yeah, you know a thing or two about that.
I actually
yeah.
brought something in this little crowler here.
Yeah,
as one of our
not
latest,
so little crowler.
Well, a crowler, a standard size crowler. Probably way too much barrel aged beer, but it's our most recent project, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that a little later when we're drinking those.
It's
Nice.
exciting.
Sweet.
But
Looking
otherwise,
forward to
going great. Thanks for having me.
it. Cool. All right. I think we'll have to see what's going to be in that can. Do you have any idea what's going to be when that can open? What's going to pour out? Seltzer, you think?
Probably.
I think so too.
You never know.
Hopefully. One can dream.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Mike. It's always awesome having you on. So
We did. I can say it now because we scrapped the project, but for about 2 years we were working on a barrel aged seltzer, and then we just decided.
it was too good to release to the public.
Yeah, we kept it for ourselves.
Seltzer is too hot.
Yeah, I know. Hey, that's what I do that with all my best thoughts. I keep them to myself, and only the shitty ones get put out on the show.
Same.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for coming on. Now, the next 2 are both first timers, so they're both going to have to introduce themselves because that's tradition. Well, we can't do it at the same time, but
So it's not a level of seniority. But
yeah.
whatever.
But we'll do it by alphabetically by last name. How about that? All right. So, Sean, why don't you take the mic and let everyone know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Sean, co-owner and director of brewery operations over at Phase 3 in Lake Zurich. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really actually honored to kind of be on this podcast with 2 great powerhouse. I don't want to give it away because he hasn't introduced himself, but 2 great powerhouse breweries with just incredible barrel programs. So thank you. Yeah, excited.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on. And last but certainly not least, what's up, Marty? How are you?
What up, everybody? I'm Marty Scott of Revolution Brewing. I operate with honor a barrel program at Revolution for Jim Seaback, our brewmaster, and with the help of my partner in all things oak, Victor Maravilla.
Nice. And then do you just do, Marty, are you just doing, because I know, Sean, you do everything, and we've talked with you extensively, Mike, but do you do any does everything you touch go into a barrel, Marty?
More and more, everything that I do has something to do with oak, but I love producing boutique quantity, keg conditioned Keller lagers and stuff. That's what I really like to drink. I think there's a lot of art that's not being made available widely to the average drinker there. There's so much room to play and have fun in traditional methods, and that's really what we love doing. So whether it's a non-adjuncted pastry stout, or if it's a oak fermented French oak aged English mild, I'm happy to do any of that kind of stuff.
An adjuncted pastry
What is a
stout?
non-adjuncted pastry stout?
Right?
Oh, you'll have to just wait and see.
Okay.
You?
All right.
Mind blown.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So he didn't misspeak. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And just for everyone listening, Marty and Sean have to share a mic, so there may be a little bit of a delay when we ask them a question, and they have to swivel the mic around. And it's like old Studio B days.
Classic.
We used to call that the Doppler effect. When I was a sound engineer,
Yeah.
You swing the
right.
mic around.
Exactly. Yeah, as it gets closer, they start talking a little bit
Leslie
earlier.
speaker.
Yeah. So basically, the idea behind the show, Mike, I almost said Mike S, but Mike Shallow, was, we've done some kind of style-specific shows in the past, and we were thinking of like what other ones can we do, and kind of the one that was staring us in the face was barrel-aged beer, because as people in Chicago probably are tired of hearing, but the beer geeks here, but they Chicago people
Slipped up.
Yeah. It's like when you're a fanboy and you say we won. I hope we it's one of those things. But Chicago is the home of barrel aged stout, right? Bourbon barrel aged stout specifically, right?
Unless you believe that lying bastard Larry Bell.
Oh
But
yeah.
everyone claims they invented it, but yes, it arguably was invented in Chicago.
Well, I mean, what are do you guys have like official archives at Goose Island? I mean, do you have an historian? What do you guys say, Mike?
I think the official line is Greg Hall created the first bourbon barrel aged imperial stout. He gives credit to Sam Adams for the first barrel aged beer for Triple Bock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A beer that I've never had. And,
oh, really?
I don't even know when I assume they don't make it anymore.
Is that the one in like the little blue bottles?
Yeah, I may have one.
Yeah, I've never
I'll
had it.
I'll see if I can find it later.
Besides being a Bock, I don't actually know the specific barrels used or whatnot. I know very little about it, but Greg always gives Sam Adams credit for the first barrel-aged beer. So Goose Island takes credit for the first bourbon barrel-aged imperial stout.
Right, and just off the top, if we say barrel-aged, it means like intended to be flavored by the barrel and the oak, not like just fermented in barrels, because barrels have been used to ferment things for a long time.
Sure.
But the intention wasn't to add the character of a spirit to it. So just from now on out, every time we say that, don't write us a letter being like, well, actually, and then push your glasses up like I do all the time.
Well, is that a good place to start? I mean, should we talk about like why stouts and barrels? Is that a little too beer 101? I mean, I think we should get into it. Yeah. I mean, for all you guys, what are you guys hoping to impart on a beer by putting it on oak? Is there anything that you're trying to, why? Why put it in a barrel? What's the whole point of doing that? Just so it gets like more untapped bottle caps, or? That's the correlation I've noticed.
Usually,
yeah.
I'll start, I guess, because I got a microphone in front of
me.
me.
Yeah, because you swung the microphone.
I did swing the microphone. I did that.
I was waiting for you. You looked like you had something to say.
Revolution is the only brewery that I've ever worked for, so I speak to my own experience, which I have to admit is limited in scope, just by that. For me and for our program, the Deepwood series, we are looking now, never mind 10, 12 years ago when we first started sinking beer into whiskey barrels. We're looking to maximize flavor intensities. There are ways to balance them, and we are learning ever more about ways to balance them to make them more approachable, to simultaneously celebrate traditional methods and make them more commercially viable in an ever-increasing and changing, modernizing market. We want to bring the most flavor and aroma intensity that we possibly can, but still make an intriguing and drinkable, enjoyable beer that you don't necessarily have to share with 4 different friends. You don't have to wait for that perfect moment to open up a can or bottle. We want you to be able to enjoy these beers because it's Tuesday and you're tired, or it's Wednesday and you're celebrating something, or just because you don't have anything else cold in the fridge at the time. We want to make accessible, flavorful, intense, balanced, enjoyable beers for every budget and every situation.
So a special beer, but not too special.
Well, we make too special as well.
Oh, okay. All right. But that isn't the primary goal. Okay.
Yeah, it's really about balance and accessibility and pulling away all the smoke and mirrors and just the hype about stuff. You can't really taste hype. We want to make sure that the liquid drives the reputation more so than anything else.
Cool.
Marty, I've got a question because I actually don't know. Were you at Rev when these recipes were originated, or did you inherit them?
A little bit of both. I started as a volunteer about 2 months after the brew pub opened. They opened in early February 2010. I finished the Siebel Concise course in April of 2010, and Michelle Foyk, who lied to everybody and told me to lie to everybody, saying I was her cousin, allowed me in and told Jim Seaback, our brewmaster, I was her cousin. I just finished Siebel. Can he come see a brew? And everything grew from there. Long story short, these recipes are still primarily Jim Seaback's, our brewmasters. What I've done is I've played with our process. In the early days, it was good beer in, good beer out. So we put the best beer possible into barrels. We waited as long as we possibly could, which oftentimes was not that long. And then we released a beer. And many times it was very good, probably far less perfect than what we're working towards now. And speaking to what we're doing now is we don't make D-Star is not one recipe. It could start anywhere from 36 Plato or 36% sugar as a wort stream, and it could finish anywhere, or it could, like 36 Plato is like a sweet component, 20 to 24 Plato would be a drier component. And then based on those starting points, we have different finishing targets. So we're intentionally making way too sweet for our taste and way too dry for our taste in almost every beer that we produce that's destined to barrels, because they're very difficult to control. They start in a state of sugar toxicity and finish in a state of alcohol toxicity, and the yeast is usually showing double middle fingers to the brewer who is telling the yeast what to do when you're dealing with these extremes. So rather than aiming for a single recipe and a single outcome, we spread them out. We aim for a really big target on one side and a really big target on the far extreme. We age them, we see where they wind up, and then we bring them back together just using basic algebra. And then we're able to hit a very specific tiny bullseye pretty much every time. And we take this yeast fermentation variability out of the equation to where we can make a beer that, as we say, as the brewer intended, which for my money is the sexiest expression in all of brewing.
What else is all right? So Marty just
Well,
said
the
everything.
podcast's
I mean,
over.
he
I
just-
think
yeah,
that was
yeah.
the entire
Great.
outline.
Thanks, Marty. Appreciate that. No, I have a question. So I think that do all three of you create a beer specifically made to go into barrels, or is it a beer that can otherwise kind of stand on its own, or are the beers that you're putting into these spirit barrels specifically, do they need to have that barrel as a component to make them a complete beer?
Well, I'll get on that. And we tasted through some, what was it, 2-week-old Bourbon County Stout in the barrel, maybe even 1-week-old, 4-month-old, and 8-month-old. We pulled samples for the Beer Temple folks when they came through a couple months ago. And so you can actually speak to that because you tasted it. But for myself, at least with Bourbon County Stout, we're talking about a beer when I started at Goose Island in 2011 was underway. It was 20 years or so underway at that point. So at that point, it was just like I started as a brewer, then worked in the cellar, then started working with barrels, and then I inherited the barrel program. But this was already a juggernaut, So it was really more just don't fuck it up type of thing, and not really go too rogue. Like bring your ideas that make the quality better of this beer So I find that Marty's philosophy or Rev's philosophy on that is really intriguing to me because for us it is a blending process, but almost every single beer is a single recipe. That again, Bourbon County Stout fresh is it's a 30 Plato beer that ferments to about 10.5 Plato. It's full of esters that if you remember the isoamyl acetate, it was just a ton of that.
Yeah.
A lot of like black licorice. And I think a fine beer, but we don't release that beer on its own.
Did you used to release it on its own? Is it like Night Stalker or something like that?
Yeah, but that would be Night Stalker was dry hopped. Big John
hoppy.
was an addition of cocoa nibs. So the beer never got released as an imperial stout.
Never ever,
has,
as far as you know. Okay.
And so if you talk to Greg about this, because again, it was his beer, this beer was made to be aged. And not just aged as in oxidation, but aged, of course, in the presence of spirit, in this case, bourbon, and the flavors that come from that. So since then, of course, we've created a lot of our own recipes as a team. We've got a big team, and we've learned a lot. Anything from how the spirits affect, how the Sean, actually, I don't want him to talk here in a second here too, but he dropped a nugget on me a couple years ago when we were doing a collab about how he feels Munich malt after time, whether through oxidation or just through the process of aging, transforms into this very fruity component. And I'd never considered that or thought that before, so that was something that I thought was really intriguing. I don't know if you want to speak more on that, but either way, I want to get you in front of the microphone there, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah, and while you're talking about that, just answer. I'd be interested to hear if you also have beers that just need to go into the barrel, or if you have beers that maybe can do both, stand on their own, or go into wood.
So at Phase 3, we have probably 8 to 10 different stout recipes at this point, ranging from they kind of carry the same base and kind of approach. So gravity is usually staying the same. I'm actually surprised Marty saying about 36 is where they're at. We hung around 36, 37 for quite some time. Realized the market has shifted. People are interested in more barrel forward, less pastry. So we're starting to fill stuff a little lower than that, not too much lower, but sub 35 at least. So we're finishing,
Can you talk a little bit about what that means, like sub 35, and what literally that means, and what effect that has it for the end?
So when we're talking degrees Plato, it's basically like Marty pointed out earlier. It's just you're talking about a % of sugar in that liquid. So we measure that, and 37 is ridiculously high. 36 is ridiculously high. I mean, anything over 30 to me is ridiculously high.
Meaning a lot
of sugar.
Sugar toxicity, as Marty was saying. Yeah.
To put that in perspective, kind of the standard gravity wort would be something like 11 Plato for like a 5% beer type of something. So when we're talking 35 Plato, let's just use that as reference. It's a lot of stress on the yeast, and then it's also results in a higher finishing gravity. So during fermentation, the sugars are consumed and turned into CO2 and alcohol primarily, as well as like Mike pointed out, esters and flavor compounds and stuff are developed during that process. But the higher finishing gravity, we get the higher starting gravity, we get a higher finishing gravity, which really is just sweetness, sugar in the beer, but very much associated to mouthfeel, is what we've found. There's other ways of getting mouthfeel, but nothing really can compete, in my opinion, with
the thick with 2 C's.
The
That's
thick
what we're
with
talking
2
about.
C's, yes.
Got it.
It's definitely sugar derived.
And so how do you go about achieving these higher starting and finishing gravities? Are there specific things you're doing in the brew house, or is it just that the yeast just is tired at the end? Are you mashing really high? Like, what techniques are you guys using to create the beers that you're... the worts, or that then becomes the beer that becomes your barrel aged.
Sure. So depending on the recipe, we'll typically basically maxing out our mash tun, getting every amount of grain that we can possibly fit in there. We definitely lose a lot of efficiency as we do that too. And then usually longer than normal boils for us. We're usually 3 to 4 hours typically.
Evaporation and
exactly. Yeah, sorry. So just, basically drive off water to concentrate that wort, so the sugar is higher. And then at Phase 3, we do use sugar to help get to the level that we need. So we'll use either DME or Brewer's crystals are sometimes, not usually in our stout recipes though, but if we need to, we kind of keep those on hand just in case. But we're trying to get everything from high mash, and we actually don't mash very high. We mash low. We want really fermentable, where as fermentable as we can. So our stuff is usually like 148 to 150, which is pretty low for a stout. We'll end up with this wort that's 37 Plato. We oxygenate it a little bit more than we typically would for a standard gravity beer. And then we're normally doing fresh pitches of American ale yeast these days. It started with British yeast. British yeast tends to have a less attenuative properties. It doesn't like to get the alcohol, up to the 12s. It usually will kind of poop out on us around 11. So we switched over to Chico, and we basically always hit about 12%. Sometimes it surprises us. We get up to like 12.5, but very consistently we'll hit a ABV target of 12 going into a barrel. Sorry. We'll hit a target of 12 ABV, but the finishing gravity will kind of be manipulated, and that's based on the original gravity, very much so. So we start higher. We're still going to hit 12% ABV. It's attenuated well, by in the sense of like
Right.
it is
Relative
getting
speak,
to getting the 12%, but there might be extra sugar still left because we started higher.
Sure.
And we've been playing with that. We've been trying to get a little bit drier stuff to start balancing out. We're kind of predicting in the future, a year from now or 2 years from now, what the market is going to be looking like, what kind of beers we're already kind of liking. And it's a waiting game. It's just kind of, that's the process.
So interesting to hear you say that about how the market and how consumers, it's kind of ebbing and flowing with what they're looking for in their imperial stouts. Because I've also noticed that there was a period where they were getting sweeter, and now they're starting to come back. It's interesting. I mean, to be able to it's not quite a time capsule, but we opened a 2010 rare. I think I mentioned that to you, Mike. Did I that we opened up a?
I was here.
Oh, that's right.
Well, I wasn't here when you opened it, but I popped in and unconnected to your opening of the bottle, and you saved me a pour.
Right. And well, obviously I enjoyed it because I forgot until right now that you were there. Yeah, it was after the fact you were at the bar. Yeah. And it was amazing to taste how relatively thin that was compared to some of the big heavy hitters that come out today. And it wasn't that long ago.
No, I remember when I was at Pipeworks and doing the barrel aged stuff there. Jones Dog usually was somewhere in 28 to 30 Plato starting and 10 to 12 finishing, and that back then that was just massive.
Right.
Like it was a huge beer. It was like, is this too sweet? And then by the time I left, it was already like a little thin baby beer compared to what people were making.
It's interesting how
Like
there's
for me, that was like 5-6 years.
how there's
of
trends.
time, 7 years of time.
Yeah. That's really interesting to hear, and that you're also kind of like, what do you just like? Well, you said what you're liking. Is it just you go out and you're doing market research, or just stuff happens to come and you taste it and you say, oh, that's kind of cool? Or
we definitely do market research, and we're a brewery kind of known for our stouts and stuff, so people drop stuff off. And I think more than that, though, it's just kind of there's been this wave of not to derail the barrel age thing, but there's been this wave of lagers and classic English style beers and lower ABV, which is stuff that we've been drinking. So the palate shock, if you will, of going from a lager and then drinking a big 37 Plato OG stout that's been sitting in cask for 20 months or whatever is kind of just too much. I want there should be a pretty good shock, but the shock was almost too much. So I think it's more driven by us as
that's
brewers
fascinating.
and feedback that we watch and monitor and stuff. So
Right, because even though these special beers, obviously they still sit within your brewery's larger portfolio, so they have to make sense contextually in what you're presenting to people outside of your barrel program, right?
But it's even interesting if I'm personally drinking more of this, so what I used to make tastes out of balance compared to what I used to drink and how it fit into it, even within or with a portfolio or not. It's just interesting how trends outside of. I think it very much is within this conversation how trends outside of barrel aged beers will affect still a barrel aged stout, which is
100%.
pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, and Sean introduced us to this whole idea. Of course, we've been making a 30 Plato stout for decades, and Sean, when we did a collab, what was your quote? We want the beer to finish at about 15 Plato.
Oh, yeah.
I go,
Right.
holy cow,
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
wild. And we did a 35, 36 Plato beer.
Yep.
And we at Goose have a mash filter. So one of the things that we challenged ourselves to do was to do it entirely of malt. So we've made a couple of 35 and 36 Plato beers or worts entirely of malt, which I really don't, you mentioned what you do with your process. I don't think anybody with a mash tun, lauter tun is going to be able to do that all malt unless it's ridiculously oversized. I could be wrong.
Just over boiling, which I run into a lot. The people that are boiling overnight, and not to throw shade at them. I just, I want to go home and see my family. So
boiling overnight, very scary.
very scary, and yeah, just or paying someone to kind of be there to watch a boil is just you're watching wort boil all night. Yeah, I have a family. I have a life outside of brewing and outside of the business, so. I wouldn't want to be there. I wouldn't want to have any of my brewers have to stay there. And we found really good results using DME. I am on the page though that I would love to be able to get away from that and still get a good yield without evaporating all of it.
So DME for the noob here.
Dried malt extract.
Okay, because I thought it was also isn't it
Diatomaceous earth. Yeah.
I was
Really
like, I don't think they're
thick
adding
thick mouthfeel.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, dried malt extract.
Oh. Okay.
Diatomaceous is one word.
Okay. Got it.
I
so-
just learned that from Marty.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
We use it, and I'm not ashamed of it at all. Some of the favorite breweries that I have out there, I know use it and or similar products to it, liquid versions or whatever.
It's high quality and it's a tool like anything else.
Exactly. Yeah. But I am on the page of. We actually are looking at a mash filter ourselves for our smaller system. We're getting quoted out, but it seems to be the way that quite a few breweries actually that are getting mash filters. I don't know if you guys started that trend in the Midwest here or what, but it makes a lot of sense, especially when you're making a decent amount of beer. So
yeah, we can talk about that offline.
Okay.
We don't need to go into mash filter talk here,
Yeah.
but I think there's a lot of
Pretty cool. I can say that.
Insiders round table, baby.
you can
Let's go.
recover a lot more wort, very expensive wort with mash filter. So
That hammer mill rocking. And what does bitterness play in these? We've been talking a lot about like super high gravities, but how do you guys approach bitterness in these beers? Is it mostly coming from roasted malts, or are you adding hops? I know that there's a wide range for stouts, right? Like some are basically no IBU, and some are like old school ones are like 80 going into the barrel. So where do you guys fall on like?
I'll go real quick, and then I'm going to pass it to Marty because I know he wants to get in here too. But most of our stouts were between 35 and 45 calculated IBUs. And then it's actually cool that you mentioned the roast component of it, because I think a lot of people kind of forget that while it's not isomerized alpha acids, it is a bittering component. And I think a lot of people overlook that when they're building their stout recipes, because I've had a lot out there that are 80 or 90 IBUs, and they don't have or they have too much roast or not enough or whatnot, and can really throw off the balance. So yeah, we're like 35, 40 IBUs, and then rely a lot on our dark malts, and we use a ton of darker colored malts.
So at Revolution, we're making English styles more so than American styles when we're sinking into bourbon barrels, especially. You've got
So what do you mean? Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we're looking at malt first and just enough hoppiness to give balance to the beers. So 30 to 40 IBUs usually is enough for an English barley wine, an English stout. If you're going to call it an American stout, regardless of the hops you're using, typically you're going to be going for American varieties. The hop bitterness is going to be much higher as well. And we really want to focus on the expression of malt as it gets to sing in a barrel or with oxidation. That's really what we're trying to do at Revolution. So low bitterness, and then we're aging anywhere from our dry components are aging for 8 to 16 months. Our sweet components, sometimes up to 5 years. So the half-life of hop bitterness, from what I remember, is 6 months or a year or something like that. Every interval of time halves the amount of IBUs that
we did some studies. I'm not to interrupt, but we did some studies on BU actually for Brewery Yard. If you remember that beer,
Love that
we
beer.
tracked. It was 95 BU, and again, not a stout, but it was a barrel aged beer. It was 95 BU post fermentation, pre barrel, and 11 months later, we lost about a third. So we were down in the low 60s, and I had it tracked for about the next bottles. That is, once it was packaged, for the next probably 2 to 3 years. And if memory serves, it would tick down about another 5% a year after that. That first year, about a third, a big chunk. And then it just kind of trickled down after that. Again, that was a very different beer, but, starting very high, 95, and working its way down. So and that's really the only time we've done BU, a long-term. We actually started it with a wort all the way through to 3 years later. For us, just to touch on Goose, again, with Bourbon County Stout, a recipe that existed before my time, we're hitting, it's funny because the recipe actually says 60. It doesn't end up anywhere near that. We actually can calculate for it, and we end up usually 25 to 32.
When it's coming out of the barrels, or when it...
Yes, but if the finished product,
Got
yes.
it. Cool. So it goes in at 60, comes out around...
It doesn't actually go in at 60. I want to say it goes in the high 40s.
Cool.
But it's coming out 25 to 32 typically with some variants.
Cool.
Yeah,
So just enough. Same with Marty. Just enough balancing bitterness because again, it's very much about the malt and the bitterness is meant to balance out everything.
And another pertinent thing here is we're talking about the bitterness of wort streams versus finished beer. Yeast go into a fermentation, they propagate, and then isoalpha acids from hops stick to their cell walls. And what do yeast do if we do our jobs right as cellar people is they precipitate out and they don't go into a barrel. So the yeast is caked in isoalpha acids, so they precipitate that bitterness out as they drop into the cones of these conical tanks.
Or blow off.
Or blow off, yeah.
If you've seen big beers, high gravity beers with big blow offs, you're losing a lot of iso through that as well.
Yeah, dry hopping would do the same thing. And these are strong, hyper-alcoholic fermentations. There's a lot of activity. That physical agitation, just like a dry hop that's a little bit too early, will scrub a lot of bitterness. Anti-Hero used to be produced with over 100 IBUs in the brew house, and as a result of the dry hopping, we got it down to the target of about 65 to 70 IBUs. And that was just the physical agitation, the foaming that's happening. And of course, this is going to be happening in a 30 Plato starting gravity word stream if we've pitched appropriately.
Wow.
Yeah. I guess so, moving from recipe formulation, kind of brew house stuff, into the vessel you're actually going to end up putting these in, right? Should we move there?
Yeah.
What do you guys look for when you're sourcing barrels, and how do you go about sourcing your barrels? Are there things you look specifically for? Are there things you look to avoid? And not necessarily give away sources or anything like that, but
I'll start by saying that the first thing that I'll advise any brewer to know is when was the barrel dumped. Most of us are buying barrels through brokers. There's lots of brokers out there. Since we're buying in large volumes, we'll also buy direct from distilleries in truckloads. Either way, you want to know when that barrel's dumped. A barrel, for the purposes of barrel-aged beer, spirit barrel-aged beer, of course, a barrel is an ingredient. A brewer wants to know everything they can about their hops and their malt. Same with the barrels. If you don't know when that barrel was dumped, do not buy it, in my opinion. You should be on a first-name basis with your broker. That is the most important person to you if you're making barrel-aged beer.
Marty's giving the hallelujah sign. Yeah.
You need to treat the barrel with respect, and there is no COA. You know this, Mike. Mm-hmm. There's no COA that you get with your barrel delivery that says, like, that bung was never opened and we can vouch for the integrity of this barrel, and there's no dump date on it. You know nothing. So you have to have trust of your broker. I would visit your broker, mostly down in Kentucky, regularly, once a year. We go down to Kentucky. I was just down there. We go to Kentucky at least once a year to talk with everybody that we buy barrels from. And the word that I was starting to hear when we were down there was everybody is extended rinsing their barrels now. Now, that got me really scared. And by that, I mean what they're doing is certain distilleries are trying to harvest more distillate from the barrel. We talk about oak and we talk about distillate. Master blender he actually recently retired at Heaven Hill, Mike Sonny, told me when we were down there years ago, 2 to 5 gallons of whiskey can reside in the barrel right after it was dumped. So you look in and you see maybe just a glisten. There's potentially 2 to 5 gallons of foolproof whiskey in that barrel that you want. Of course, it's evaporating quickly. Hopefully, most of these places really respect the barrel aftermarket, but some of the bigger guys are starting to put water in them, put them in a warehouse, and actually pull that distillate out of the barrel.
And then evaporate the water again, or
no, they'll
Or
take
use
the
it as the
water out.
blending,
It's now
I guess, for cutting.
you've got lower proof whiskey that you can use it for cutting downstream products. So it makes sense if you think about what they're trying to do. Bourbon is so hot right now; it's on fire. They need every drop. So they want to get those 2 to 5 gallons out of the wood. But I will go on the record that our 4 primary that we use, which is Buffalo Trace, Heaven Hill, Four Roses, and Wild Turkey, do not do that.
well, if everyone's doing it and those giant distilleries are not, how can those two things both be true?
Well, that's not my quote. Everyone is
Okay.
doing it. When we were down there, we talked
okay.
to a pretty substantial distillery, and in their estimation, everyone was doing it.
Which meant
That's
they
why
were doing it.
So I called up or emailed all of our major suppliers direct, not through our broker. And I know the dump line managers at all the distilleries, and
Of course you do.
all of them said they'll do what their standard is like a 1 to 2 gallon rinse post dump, right on the line, bung it up, off. That's perfectly fine. To me, that's standard. The term rinse in the industry, though, I don't know if you've heard this, you probably have. When they say rinse, it's not a 1 to 2 gallon rinse. It's an extended aging or extraction under pressure or other methods to get the distillate out. So I would just, again, make sure as a brewer that you know where your barrels are coming from, when they were dumped, and what their dump line practices are.
Well, that has twofold implications too, right? One is obviously flavor. If the whiskey's not in there, you're not going to get the flavor of the whiskey, but it could also be microbial.
It's microbial. That ethanol is your protection until it gets to you. Yeah.
Oh,
So if you dilute that,
interesting.
then it's not as...
Having been through the nightmares of a infection,
You don't say.
The most well-documented one in the industry, I can tell you, we learned a lot through having to basically break it down and rebuild it. And yes, that's one of those things. We were actually reusing barrels for a period of time there. Sure. So we would take Bourbon County Stout out of or another and put another beer in. We never do that again.
Right. And that's why, like, spirit barrels, it's really tough to kind of reconstitute them because almost all those techniques have water involved in them, right? Like steaming is one thing, but like if you're trying to soak them and rehydrate those stains.
You're saying if you get a barrel that's
so dry that it might be leaking a little bit. Steam might be
less than ideal. And this is kind of a different thread of like, I put all barrels, and I'm sure these guys do as well, into domestic and anything coming out from outside of the U.S. Anything coming outside of the U.S. is just a different set of standards because it takes so long to get here.
Sure.
And we get American whiskey very quickly and at a very high quality. And, of course, it's only a single use. Tequila, rum is where barrels go to die. We just got some port barrels and cognac barrels in from Europe. Took 2.5 months. Luckily, they were in good shape, but 2.5 months. We get barrels. These guys, all of us get barrels in next day after they're dumped if we're doing our job.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Yeah,
big difference.
Mm-hmm. Sean, Marty, what do you guys look for in sourcing your barrels? Do you just call up your best friend who works at every distillery and
exactly? By by first name, the dump line manager.
Yeah.
No, I I call my best friend, Dr. Ben Loskin, formerly of Lincoln, Nebraska. He just moved down to Louisville, Midwest Barrel Company. I'll happily do a plug for them. Midwest Barrel Company and Dark Matter Coffee are my two most important suppliers, and the relationship comes first. That line of communication, that level of trust, their investment in your product is a massive safety measure. Plus, you get an opportunity to learn so much more about what you're buying. You're all the more educated in how to go about using it and designing your products or altering your existing products to fit around what your trusted suppliers can give you. The relationship is more important than so many other superficial kind of messaging board ideas or lessons that the people think they know. Those relationships they will open the road for you going forward, and they will give you a realistic idea of how to approach making beer in the future using their ingredients, whether it's a barrel or a coffee bean. We have great relationships with our hop growers. Heck, we go out and we select hops. We go to the Pacific Northwest and we select hops, don't we? Ken Grossman certainly spends a lot of time with his hop growers and his brokers, and he gets the first cut on everything because he's fucking Ken Grossman and he deserves it, at least with the Cascade crop. So just going, those relationships, pardon me, I'm losing my train of thought here. We'll have to edit this out. But
great.
the relationship is everything. I'm going down to work CBC with Midwest Barrel Company, not with Revolution, just because they wanted me to go down and advise other people, other brewers, what they should be looking for, what they shouldn't have to worry about. We know when these barrels were emptied. We know what was in them. They're guaranteed to not be second use or rinsed in a meaningful way. If we find an issue with it, we've got that reputation, that relationship to rely on. And they say, oh, well, this isn't what we meant to sell you. We'll take it back. That's pulled my bacon out of the fire a couple of times. Just these relationships have done so much for Revolution specifically to move the ball forward in our own program. We can buy, wacky barrels from France if we want cognac barrels. We've gotten cognac barrels that have gotten us 4 ABV as a result of aging in them, and then we've gotten cognac barrels that got us 1 ABV. The barrels are always going to be changing. These are agricultural products, the same as anything else we're using in many senses. But what we want to know is when these barrels were emptied, were they rinsed, and do you stand by it? And a good relationship is the number one thing, in my experience, that you can do to ensure that you're not going to get a nasty surprise after you've sunk $250,000 worth of beer into a lot of barrels.
And it's kind of going back to what you've said in the past on this show, Mike, is, and I think you said it on this show, Mike Siegel, is that it's one of the ingredients. The barrel is one of the
100%. And of course, our focus is American whiskey. Most of that bourbon, some of that rye, but you can do some great things with barrels from around the world. You're just taking. I always tell everybody, set your expectations for a 50% failure rate on the barrels. If we're getting in 20 or 50 tequila barrels or rum barrels or anything outside the country, set your expectations that it might be a high failure rate. So if you're willing to take on that risk. Bourbon, again, in our experience, and as a brewery that went through some tough times, we take it very seriously. We do, of course, microbial checks. We do sensory checks, everything along the way. We've got a lot of people that are dedicated to this, of course. We're able to throw a lot of great people at the process. And then at the end, we also flash pasteurize. So that was a big change after 2015 as well.
Sure.
But that is not a cure that, you have to be clean upstream. That's a flash pasteurization is just that last bit of insurance.
I have a question. What makes for assuming that the barrels were all treated well and have been treated the way you want them to and came to you the way and in the shape that you want them to, it does the spirit itself in the barrel. What qualities do you think makes for a better end product, if any, or is it just a crapshoot? Like, are there certain types of whiskey? Is there certain ages of whiskey that are better? Does that matter, or does Benchmark and Pappy 23? It doesn't matter. It for the end product.
I'd like to think it matters, and we've done a lot of different variations on honing in on a single type of barrel for releases for that reason. And I'll leave it up to the beer drinkers to make the call whether they like it or not. But for us, it does make a difference, and it's an interesting thread to play with.
Yeah, it's a hard question to ask you guys too, because there's always, there's cachet to say that it does matter as well. I'm not saying that you're not being honest, but I'm saying it is a tough question as well.
Yeah, and again, we're putting a lot of time and effort into that. So for us, that's something that's meaningful. And we didn't really go into this with that plan. It just kind of arrived at that. Even if going back to 23-year-old Pappy for the original rare that you mentioned, that was kind of the first real call out that we ever had for
Never heard of that beer.
What a barrel
whiskey?
was.
What is that? The cognac, right?
But if we're talking about American whiskey, again, I think age of the barrel does impact. When I started, the bourbon industry was in a very different place than it is now. So all of our barrels 10 years ago we had a mandate 8+-year-old barrels, and you could get an entire truckload of 8+-year-old barrels back then. And then over time, it was like, wait a second, we can't. What was happening, and you mentioned, the relationship with the broker. Our broker at the time was really just funneling barrels to Scotland. So we didn't realize it because we weren't going down there having conversation, but that was majority of their business. They would be breaking those barrels down to put a new stave in if they thought it'd be leaking. Their whole business was based around Scotch. And of course, they've got different needs than we do. They weren't built around what a brewery needs. So one of those things we went down there in 2016 after our issues was to say, never crack open a barrel of ours again. Literally take it off the truck from the distillery, grade it. We'll take A, B, not C, and then put it on a truck for Goose Island as long as it's graded out. We'll take 4+-year-old barrels, so that's still our standard right now, which is the majority of American whiskey out there. But 4+-year-old barrels are usually getting a range of 4 to 8. And then, again, our 4 distilleries that we use are the ones that we've talked to the dump line managers. We won't just bring in any bourbon barrel, basically. So beyond that, yes, the distilleries have different mash bills, and then there's rye whiskey and all that. That all comes into play for sure. But we like to differentiate ourselves by doing all those different things, and maybe we'll crack that thing open and have see what that's all about. But for me, it's outside of American whiskey, and again, I'm going to let Sean speak here. That's a whole different can of worms. But assuming we're talking mostly about American whiskey, rye, and bourbon, it's whatever point I was trying to make, I can't remember.
I think you made it. Yeah, you nailed it.
And you, Sean, have you noticed that there's any type of barrel or quality of barrel, meaning what was in there, how long it was aged, that you look for, or do you get a blend, or is there kind of like a certain magic barrel that whenever it comes up, you try to snatch it, anything like that?
Yeah, so I think got to kind of zoom out and look at the philosophy of Phase 3 in our barrel program is a little bit different. Obviously, we're smaller. Our releases are way smaller.
Smaller than Goose?
A little bit, yeah.
How many dump line managers do you know? Do you have on speed dial?
So I think that's important, just to kind of give perspective of kind of where how I can answer this. But we're filling and emptying barrels pretty much all year round. We're filling only about 20 casks a month, and emptying a little less than that because we're trying to grow the barrel program a little bit. I think we're just over 300, which
that's
300 cask filled. Yeah, it's a decent size for a brewery of our size. But we play around a lot. We don't have a specific brand that we're always trying to, make sure that we have recreated or kind of have a target, like he mentioned, the very small bullseye that they want to shoot for Death Star and stuff like that. We do a beer once a year that's called Minushi. It's a non-adjuncted barrel-aged stout. There have not been any bullseye defined yet. We don't have that yet. So it's really just going through our barrel stock, seeing what sounds interesting, trying those barrels, looking at the age dates or the age that the beer has spent in there. And we're usually blending anything between no less than 12 months. Really trying to get that minimum up to like 15, which we should be there pretty much right now. And then all the way up to, we have stuff that's approaching 40 months. And we'll use that in small quantities. So we get this average. And I've said that on other podcasts too. And I usually say it in conversation with people as like a general rule of thumb for us. We're trying to find a target. If we had any sort of bullseye, we're trying to find our target would be 1 month per degree Plato finishing gravity is kind of a standard, if you will, for us. So our blend is usually, a blurred circle around that number, whatever that ends up being. So that's kind of the approach. But as far as barrel selection, I'd just echo what both of them said. Quality of barrel first and foremost, in my opinion. I'd rather have a fresh, off-name brand, if you will, bourbon barrel than a Pappy Van Winkle barrel that was sitting around in someone's warehouse for 3 months. But with that said, I do think that there's probably some minor differences. I also think that I'd be lying if I gave too much credit to the consumer to recognize some of those differences, because it's hard for me sometimes, someone who's around that daily, to even recognize Heaven Hill to even like an Elijah Craig, which are the same brand and stuff. But I don't notice sometimes a huge difference. But I do prefer, Heaven Hill and Buffalo Trace are probably my two favorites to work with. I think because they dump on a very consistent basis and we're able to get them fresh. So they've treated me well. Yeah, I don't know if that.
That's interesting. I have something that I wanted to talk to you about, because when we were doing tastings for the Temple of Death, I wanted to kind of piggyback onto what you were about to say. It seems like.
Yeah, I'm sure my marketing and communications departments would be upset if I didn't tell the cool story, bro, bit. So, does the barrel matter? Yeah. Mike and Sean have elucidated plenty of reasons upstream why it matters. Just the same as, what do hops matter in an IPA? Well, fuck yeah, they matter. And they're all different. So it's up to us to understand how they're different and then how to apply them best to our vision for our products. Mike touched on the age of the barrel, and that's one of the primary things that I look to after how soon was it emptied and was it not rinsed. Then I want to know how old the barrel is. If the barrel is really old, if it's a Pappy barrel, the oak is entirely extracted, and the only way to recoup that oak is to recoup the whiskey. So if it's an old and dry barrel, then it's just a cool story. However, if it's a 3-year rye or American whiskey barrel or a 4-year bourbon barrel or something younger like that, we can pair that with a certain component that we like to age for a long time, and we can get more extraction over a longer period of time, whereas we might have another component that doesn't require the same age. So then a old whiskey barrel that's still fairly wet, which we rely on a relationship to find out, we can get in and we can recoup the oak that's left there just by recouping the whiskey. If it's a younger barrel, then we can get a lot of the barrel itself the longer we're touching it. So this is all part of dynamic aging. And I won't go in too deep into this. We're going to put all the listeners to sleep.
It's our goal.
But they're used to it. Mostly a lullaby, this podcast.
Yeah.
So if you get an opportunity to buy a Pappy barrel that was just emptied and not rinsed, and it's got 2 to 4 gallons of whiskey locked up in the staves itself, that is a fantastic.
And sell it as bootleg Pappy.
It's a fantastic barrel, but it's not going to take you very long as to store beer in it to get what's good from that barrel. The extractive side of the equation happens very quickly when you're just stealing the liquid from a barrel. if you want to touch the wood and get the wood, you need a younger barrel if you want to maximize your extractive potential, and that's going to take time. So it's just, as a brewer, just like with the alpha acids and beta acids in a hop, you have to know its particular uses in brewing, whether it's best on the hot side, the cold side, or if you can do both. The same is true as knowing what to do with your malts, how much to use it, and in concert with how much bitterness, how much boiling. The barrel is an ingredient, and with it comes a longitudinal demand on your understanding of oxidation and evaporative concentration. That's kind of like the holy trinity: is extraction, oxidation, and concentrative evaporation. And you just have to understand the parameters of the ingredients you're using, which barrels are definitely an ingredient.
Yeah. I found it very interesting when you took the time to, pull out, I don't even know how many different barrels, and taste us through for the single barrel pick that we did last year, Marty.
Temple Ledith, fucking rock star beer.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
name and awesome T-shirt, by the way. Great design. You guys have nailed it.
We're going to be, Phineas gets the credit for the design. The kind of Temple of Doom kind of vibe going on. We're going to be cracking our last or second to last keg of that on our anniversary on May 7th. So we've been saving it. But the barrel we picked for that beer, it came down to two. I don't know if you remember this. One was a 2-year aged Weller barrel. The other one was like a 9-month-old or so Wild Turkey barrel. And I remember you saying, like, if you guys don't pick this one, and you're talking about the Wild Turkey, like, I'm marking this one down because it was really awesome. And I'm not going to lie. We had a talk, and we're like, well, all things being equal, which one can you cool story, bro? Like, which one has the cool story, bro? Is the 2-year aged Weller, or is it the... Oh, and I said it. I mean, I said it at the time. I was like, all things being equal, for the very first time we've ever done this, there's a lot of other things you have to take into account, too. Is it like, you don't want it to seem like... it's... I mean, to be completely honest, we didn't want it to seem like Rev wasn't letting us touch other elements of their barrel library, and how it's very hard for you to say, like, we passed up this to give you that. You know, it was just an easier story for one that we liked just as much, but we had that conversation at the time. But that said, we were shocked how much we loved and how unique and expressive some of these other barrels were, which is why I asked the question to begin with. Because
which one did you end up picking?
A 2-year. It was in barrel for 2 years. It was a Weller. Sure. So it was a wheated Weller, and it was great. It was awesome. I mean, the beer is good.
I'm kidding.
Yeah,
I'm just joking.
But the Wild Turkey was really good too. Yeah, completely different.
So you think if you went in blind, you may have ended up with a different result? I'm not saying, hey, as somebody who works at a brewery where we connect with brands regularly, it does. I think it resonates. I'm just curious what the greater.
I mean, there were a bunch of other ones with like name. There were Buffalo Trace barrels. There were a bunch of other ones that we. I mean, how many barrels did we taste through, Marty? It was like a ton.
It was a couple, 2 tree, 7, 8, 9, 12. I don't.
I think it was like 16 or so barrels or something. I mean, there was maybe even more, and there were a lot. And those were the two. And we all kind of voted our 1, 2, and 3. And I think when we added up the points, that was the one. But who knows if it was blind what our
it's the same thing
favorites would have been. Like, it's impossible to know.
Right.
We're human beings.
It's impossible to know.
You know? Well, 2-year Weller has a certain
vibe,
ring to it.
Well,
and also it has a certain ring when the person who is the end consumer is drinking it too.
Right.
I mean, they're also
that is
taking
part
that
of the experience.
It
right?
is. Yeah. It is. And we are taking all that stuff into account. I mean, the beer had to taste amazing.
And the consumer is so much more aware of that stuff now than like 10 years ago. Like,
Right.
back in my day when I was still at Pipeworks, we got some 35-year-old Heaven Hill barrels, and we were like, should we release these? There were 4 of them. Should we release these as their own blend? And then we blended it with the 12-year-old barrels we got at the same time, and unanimously everyone agreed the blend was better. And so we put out a blend of the 12 and 35-year-old barrels, and that was probably the best received beer we ever made. But I can almost guarantee you we would have made the same choice now. There would be too much value in saying these are 35-year-old barrels. Maybe we made a small blend of it, but that wouldn't have been the decision of like, no, this one tastes better, so it all gets blended together. There's so many more extenuating factors that people are aware of and people value. Like back then, like there really isn't any 35-year-old Heaven Hill, so there's in the same brand recognition, but it's stuff that gets blended into other stuff. But
yeah. So to answer the question is, yes, we did take that into effect. Do we stand by the end result? Absolutely. I mean, the taste of the beer is great. Yeah. So, but that was one of the main reasons I wanted to ask that question, because I was really surprised by that, Marty, and I remember saying it over and over again to everybody sitting at the table, is like, nobody else gets to realize this. Nobody else gets to experience it. And it was so eye-opening to be able to realize that. So it was, I didn't know if it was a fluke or if that's just like, no. I mean, maybe the rock star that year is going to be the 9-month aged Heaven Hill, Wild Turkey barrel. It was pretty cool. It is amazing how these things are all just, and even within the 9, you probably gave us 4, I think, Heaven Turkey. Heaven turkeys, and
how many samples?
They were so different, even within them. So I mean, there's so many variants when you talk about the Rev stuff, because it was also like some went in at higher gravity, some went in at lower gravity, some of the lower gravities went into this. We had some higher gravity wild turkeys, some lower gravity wild turkeys. We had some aged for this long, that long. It was, I mean, there's so many variations. I can't imagine putting a blend together. It must be fun, but it must be daunting.
That's a very astute summation there. It can be daunting, but when things are going well and mostly to plan, which is usually as much as we can hope for, it's a hell of a time. I'm having more fun with this job than I've ever had in 12 or so years of doing this. I liken it to being an artist. I'm not an artist. I don't consider myself an artist. But if you're making an oil painting, if all you ever do is buy your primary colors in a black and white and you never blend them, there's only so many things you can paint with it. But when you're willing to blend and you're willing to, change the hues and make those manipulations and then bring them back together in concert once they're aged in their appropriate ratios at whatever volume the sales team has asked you to execute, now the whole universe is open to you. And when I know this might be a good segue into another thing we want to talk about in blending for off flavors and complexity. At best, you get to blend for complexity, and sometimes it's a very practical thing to blend away subtle off flavors and aromas. Again, these are challenging beers, and for Revolution, we don't like to dump beer. We will if we absolutely must, but the system is put in place to allow us to react to changes once the plan changes or something doesn't go according to plan. We have to have this flexibility and creating sweet and dry components and then putting them in different aged barrels depending on how long we expect to be aging gives us the right amount of the right red, the right blue, the right green, the right black, the right white.
So it sounds like with these having different gravity beers, and you've told me that even like as you're drawing to make a blend, if you notice that you're doing more of the high gravity that you almost like put in an order, a purchase order into the brewery to say, okay, we need to refill more high gravity. We need this much high gravity, this much low gravity, or whatever it is, that you're always kind of having this balance to work with, which doesn't seem to be the case with the other two people here. Where did that system come from to do it that way? If it's not, I assumed it was industry standard until tonight.
Tis not.
Yeah, tis not.
I would think not.
Yeah.
It started with Straight Jacket batch 1228 in, I want to say, around about 2015. Straight Jacket back then, and like all of the Deepwood series, was good beer in, good beer out. There was no intentional blending unless we wanted to release more beer than the brew house could produce, or rather a fermenter could hold back in those days. We had 7.5 degrees Plato was the target finishing gravity for Straight Jacket back then. And
So dry boy.
Yeah, and there's still 7 to 8 Plato is a high finishing gravity blended for us for pretty much any of our beers. The only reason we approach or exceed that is if we know we have a ton of oak and a ton of alcohol. If the hydrophobic qualities of the beer are going to outpace the hydrophilic quantity or properties, it's going to be dry and boozy. And the other way, it's going to be sweet and flabby. So we aim for a specific relationship between alcohol and oak and sugar, and that might be a discussion for another evening. But the short version is batch 1228 a number of years ago. The mash temperature was missed. The mash kettle steam jackets got left on after mashing, and we basically mashed out before we fully converted. It was a mistake by an old brewer, and we had to make a corrective batch so that I don't remember that bad. Maybe it was 1539, I want to say.
Of course.
A very,
Gotta
yes,
get that
of course.
right.
Yeah. So we made a corrective batch that over attenuated, or basically attenuated so dry that we could blend them 50-50 and have Straight Jacket. Well, back then we could only sell 50 oak barrels or so of Straight Jacket in a year, and now we have 2 turns worth, or 2 batches worth. So we could only sell 50% of both of those batches in the first year. But once that was blended and corrected, we still had half of both the under attenuated and the quite dry, so the very sweet and the very dry batches, aged into a second year. And we thought, well, this is great because Straight Jacket is already made for next year. That box is checked. What we didn't account for was the extra year of aging before those barrels would see the light of day. And what we noticed was the dry barrels were very much like the dry barrels that we filled. They were pretty stable as a factor of time, or over a factor of time. And the sweet component, however, almost looked like a stout. It was super dark. There was this visual cue that with this high sugar liquid as a product of time had changed visibly, and it had also changed by flavor and by aromatic.
And uniformly within the high gravity. It wasn't just one barrel.
Correct.
It was all of them. Wow.
Correct. And
Is
they
that
just
oxidative effect? What is it?
Oxidative and evaporative concentration. So you have water and alcohol are fucking off out of the barrel through evaporation at about an equal rate, but the sugar doesn't go anywhere. It stays put. You put 53 gallons worth of flavor into a barrel, and that 53 gallons of flavor is still there however many years later. It's the water and the alcohol, the flavor and aroma, non-active components are evaporating. It concentrates everything else. So we see that time exaggerates what you put into the barrel in the first place. So this was a lesson that was first given to us visually when we saw the colors of the same recipe. One started and finished, or that one finished at one gravity very high and the other very low, and we saw the difference in how they aged. And And then when we blended them back together, we saw that Straight Jacket was an entirely new thing. It was the same recipe. The thing that we changed was the age. And back then, the barrels we were using typically were quite young, so we also got an extra year of extraction from the barrel. So now you have an exaggeration of extract, an exaggeration of oxidation acting on the sweet component within the barrel, and then you have an exaggeration of the evaporative concentration. So everything that you've already extracted and oxidized is now concentrated through an additional year of evaporation. And that holy or unholy trinity is the basis to our approach, and those are the primary manipulations that we're making now to make regular Old Straight Jacket versus VSO or any of the other permutations.
I was going to say, is that beer that you were talking about, did that become VSOJ?
That became the first batch of VSOJ, and we used, instead of a 50-50 blend, we'd use 3 sweet barrels to 1 dry.
Oh, cool.
And
Very
so that's what
sweet old jacket.
a very special old jacket or sweet. So what we realized was that the sugar concentration as a factor of time kind of set the ceiling for oxidative development. So the deepening and changing of flavors, you pair that with a young barrel, then you exaggerate the extractive flavors as well. And then the longer you age it, all that extra extraction, all that extra oxidation and its impact on a sweet barrel, you evaporate more, so you concentrate more. So now you can achieve 4 times the amount of flavor and color in the same footprint, only doubling its age. And this gets us into the economization or the weaponization of dynamic aging, what we refer to as barrel stack optimization at Revolution.
Nice. Barrel stack optimization. I love it. From there, I think maybe I'm ready for a short break. And then when we come back, I want to pop this crowler of a Seltzy.
Talk about BSO.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. So we'll be back shortly, and then we'll continue talking about barrel-aged stouts. See ya.
Welcome back to the Beer Temple podcast. We're having a little spirit barrel-aged beer roundtable with Mike Siegel from Goose Island, Marty Scott from Revolution, and Sean Burns from Phase 3. Some heavy hitters.
We've got a heavy hitter in the peanut gallery now too. We've got Garrison from Russian River. Sorry, I don't want to blow up your spot, but anyway,
we'll jump on Mike. Tell us everything we're wrong about.
Yeah, right. So they don't have a spirit barrel. That's one of the things I noticed when I was out in California is the spirit barrel programs do not seem to play the same role that they do here in Chicago. Obviously, Firestone Walker had one.
That's a Chicago-inspired thing, probably.
Yeah, I do think maybe it doesn't necessarily radiate from here, but it was something that was definitely noticed.
I think when winter isn't 9 months long, aging things in spirit barrels doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah.
I was out at Sierra Nevada and Chico years ago. I'm sure you've been there many times. Their whole barrel warehouse was temperature controlled to about 50 degrees.
Yeah, I remember that.
Which is different than a lot of barrel programs. For sure.
Yeah. So we're about to talk about, I think, blending is what we agreed. But before we get there, I wanted to talk about some of the beers that are opened. You brought a crowler, Mike, because that's the new format that Goose is moving toward. Is that why?
Or
ran out of bottles.
So Bourbon County's all going to be in crowlers now.
No, because I love you. I love you guys. Only
Yeah.
a few people have tasted this before right now. This is not finished beer. This is extracted from the barrels yesterday, so still in the tank. The tank's probably still crashing. So it's not been centrifuged, pasteurized, carbonated, but these are
Zwickle.
We're all pros here.
Uncarbonated, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like from the barrel basically. You might even get some barrel char between your teeth. But what this is, so I mentioned, of course, we inherited Bourbon County Stout, and I call it carrying the torch, a very important torch, and that's just making the best version of that beer every single year. We get to make our mark, for me personally and the brewing team, on the future by doing these barrel variants or doing adjunct variants and kind of taking this base beer. With a very few exceptions, we create new recipes, a barley wine, a wheat wine. Well, in this case, what this beer is a blend of 18 to 36-month-old beers, English barley wine, oatmeal stout, rye stout, quadruple. So let's see if I can remember this all. It's at least 4 different recipes, and finished in rum, bourbon, cognac, and the barrels range from, I think, probably 6 years to 17 years in age. So kind of stretching out both with malts, with barrels, with aging time. Like I mentioned, 18 to 36 months in the barrel. We don't get to do this that often, and it's our 35th anniversary in May, just like it's your anniversary in May.
Yeah.
So this has been in the works for quite a while. This is a 35-barrel cuvee.
Wow.
That we're going to release in 4-packs. Not that I don't want to turn this into a sales pitch. That's just what it is. It's going to be on sale in May.
Nice.
We want to do something different with our barrel releases. It's smaller scale. It's not this big release like we put so much focus towards, but something we tasted. We've got all these different barrels that we wanted to go through, and we got to pick and actually blend to a profile. And there's a lot of things we could have included that we didn't, that we just didn't feel were right, but it was really fun for us to work on this, for us, smaller scale, and be very deliberate with the end result.
It's interesting. I mean, talking about blind tasting, you should have almost asked me some questions before you said what it was. What I would have guessed was that it was old. I mean, it tastes like it has age to it. Yeah, and not in a bad way at all. But other than that, I had really no clue what was going on here, and I guess for good reason. But I love the aged character to it, and I don't know. I'm a sucker for like big stouts that are actually boozy, so I really appreciate
some
that
of this is
too.
double barreled in
Yeah.
17-year-old barrels. So
Nice.
Again, we try to pull all, at least for us, the many different levers that we had. A lot of these beers went into the barrel without much of a plan, so we had this stock to work with, and it's just fun project to actually see into the tank now. Yesterday, and off to the packaging team.
Did you do that because you knew you were coming on this podcast and you had to like show?
Is that why
off?
you made this
That's
way
how you
back
make
in
it
the day?
Is that how you did your production schedule?
Exactly.
Mike, do you know, or what's like the primary beer base in here, or is it pretty equal? Or
It's about 48% barley wine,
okay,
and then the quadruple is pretty small. I'd say it's like maybe 5% quadruple,
Can we say 4%?
and so 45% stout. But again, the stout is split between oatmeal, rye. The rye we do is malted rye, chocolate rye, caramel rye. Trying to think. Again, should have been better prepared, but I think it's just the 4 recipes, and then one's a cognac finished, a lot of rum finished, a lot of bourbon finished. Again, having some fun.
Yeah.
you guys usually use? Sorry, it's interesting because we only usually hear about like Bourbon County Stout, right? So I think it's kind of interesting. Do you use a lot of different recipes for Bourbon County Stout, or was that more one-off stuff that you're doing, like the oatmeal stout that you're talking about and stuff
Yeah,
like that?
we did a beer in the Bourbon County family called Special Number 4 a few years ago, which was an oatmeal stout base. It used that Simpsons that caramelized oat. That's fantastic.
Golden
If you've
Naked
ever,
Oat.
the Golden Naked Oats,
The king of oats.
it's like a caramelized oat essentially. I'm sure you've used it. That's a big driver there. And then the rye one was the base for the beer we did a couple years ago. 14 was the rye base for that. So we've incorporated them, but for whatever reason, they got adjuncts. Those recipes as brewers, we wanted to showcase. We feel like an oatmeal stout in barrel on its own could be great, but there's some internal dialogues about what the consumer is interested in. So here, again, no adjuncts. We wanted to just present malt and barrel and time as we saw fit.
Does it have a name?
It'll be,
That can be
35th anniversary cuvee.
Got it.
Yeah.
I like it.
So, and I think we've talked about format. Obviously, Bourbon County is a 500 milliliter bottle, which, again, it is what it is. But we're going to release this in a 4-pack, 12 ounce, which for me personally, 12 ounce is a great serving size for barrel-aged beer.
Good.
So,
Glad to hear it.
yeah.
That was me clapping, by the way, in case anybody didn't know.
Don't look at my the 750 I brought on the table. I'm sorry.
Shame.
There's all different ways of doing it. It's just, as somebody who, we produce 500 mil almost exclusively, it's nice to see the 12 ounce.
You also didn't used to do 12 ounce and then go away from it. So
Yeah. We've been all over.
So Chris isn't mad at you.
I think you've been very successful in what you've done.
I
there,
love
Sean.
everyone. I'm a lover, not a fighter. You know that about
I do.
me, Mike.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's the? You also have a beer that you've opened up,
Yeah.
Sean.
Figured if we were opening up some big stuff, I'd crack a bottle. So I brought a blend 2022, which kind of has a funny story, but I'll tell you what it is first. So it's a barrel-aged imperial porter. I'm sorry, it's 75% barrel-aged dark English barley wine, which makes up our arabesque base. And then the other portion, the 25%, is what makes up our pressed base, which is imperial porter. That starts a little lower than like our stout, so it has a little bit drier kind of finish to it. And we don't use any roasted barley or black malt in that, or darker, as much dark grains in it. But yeah, the story kind of, we were filling some casks, and we got to the last cask, and we ran out of the arabesque base to put in the cask. So, it was only about half filled, and we were like, man, what do we do now? So we looked in the cellar, and we're kind of like, well, we got this press base that we brewed last week. It'll be ready next week. Or we brewed it 2 weeks ago. It'll be ready next week. We decided, well, we'll just top off that barrel next week when that one's ready. We'll send it through the fuge and top her off and see what happens. And over time, we started tasting, and we're like, this is actually tasting pretty good. Like, this is very interesting. And we decided to double barrel it. We took it out of those casks, Buffalo Trace casks, and we ended up putting it in a VSO cask, cognac cask. Let it age for an additional, I think, 14 months, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. So total time was, 26 months maybe on wood, split between two different casks. But it turned out really nice. We liked it a lot. We released it for our 3-year anniversary. And it kind of inspired us. We'll kind of continue to maybe not have a more intentional effort to it, but have the same thought process of blending some of our high gravity stuff together. So it's actually funny that Mike opened up we didn't plan that.
Right.
I didn't even know it was in the crawler until just now. So cool that we both brought something that has like a unique blend that I think worked out really well.
Very interesting flavors. A lot of, and I'm not the one who like starts pulling out the tasting notes and stuff like that, but I got like a lot of like unsmoked cigar tobacco smell, which I think is very pleasant smell. Once you light up the cigar, I'm not as big a fan, but unlit cigars are very pleasant to me. Yeah, tobacco.
That comes up. Yeah, we see that quite a bit. I think you're spot on. I'm with you. I'm more of I'd rather smell the cigar unlit.
Right. So, and then some really nice kind of like chocolate orange, candied orange kind of thing too. So thanks for bringing it. And it's interesting. It's very thick with 2 C's, and you realize tasting Mike Siegel's uncarbonated version versus Sean's carbonated version, how the carbonation on these sweeter beers is critical. I mean, it really helps rinse it off your palate. Without the carbonation, it wouldn't work. I mean, and it's not like it's not like bubbly. I mean, it looks still in the glass, but you taste it, and I mean, it's certainly carbonated.
You slow poured it, got the meringue on top. It was nice. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's got that dollop going. Yeah.
We
JK.
For a long time at Phase 3 and everything, any of the cellarmen and packaging guys would kind of be like, all right, what are we carbonating it to? And it was always kind of this like, well, we don't carb to spec, we carb to taste. And it was very much, that was always still is my philosophy, but now we take notes at least. So we at least like, all right, well, what was it? Just so we know. So we do Zomit. We have a C box, but C box doesn't like this thicker stuff in there. So We Zomit, and we're usually in the low tiers.
I don't know what either of those things mean.
Sorry, yeah.
What's
C-box.
Zomit and C-box mean?
Yeah, so
Don't
just
worry about
ways of measuring gas. Our
Okay.
C-box is a very precise tool that we can measure parts per billion of oxygen as well as CO2 volume. CO2. So the volume of CO2 typically ranges on like the low end for most beer styles would be like 1.8 for like a classic English, style beer, all the way up to like 3 for like something super bubbly like a Belgian
2.5
beer.
is
higher,
pretty
maybe.
2.5 would be a
standard,
normal,
right?
give or take, 0.2
That I do.
off of
See,
2.5.
I know that at least, Mike. Mike
Nailed it.
Siegel.
Yeah. Yeah, stop throwing him shade, Mike Siegel.
We're normally very low though, so we did measure it. But yeah, that was always my philosophy on anything strong. It was like I don't want anyone to have a number in their head that we have to reach. It was based on flavor, so let's carb it to where we think it tastes balanced and incorporated and well. But they started measuring it. I think actually they didn't even tell me. They were just kind of like one day they were like, oh yeah, well the last one was this, and I'm like, well don't. Make sure we're not all the ones going forward are the same. We'll do it to taste. So
Awesome.
But we do one beer that's still and that's we do
Lambic?
no we do one barrel aged stout when we do single barrel like selects with some of our retail partners. It's very small quantity. You're talking 180 bottles or something, and we tend to not carbonate it at all. We actually don't even centrifuge it. It's the only beer that stout or barrel aged beer now that we don't centrifuge. We just give it some time cold. But gives the best representation of kind of having that crowd of people there to taste the whiskey, as well as the stout, and we kind of keep it still, so it's almost like they're pulling a nail or grabbing a sample out of the cask. So
What's
cool.
What's the highest you've carbonated barrel aged beer? And
I don't know.
What do you find when you think there's too much?
He doesn't have
carbonation?
notes.
I don't know.
With the mouth sound.
Probably 2.4 or so, 2.5 maybe.
Oh, that's pretty high. Yeah.
I'm sure we've gotten some that are up there. Depends if it's adjuncted, how thick the mouthfeel already is, and what we need to balance and stuff. So
Yeah. Well, should we talk about blending, Mike?
Yeah.
Mike Shallow.
So you guys have hundreds of barrels in stock. When you go about to make a beer to put into a bottle or a keg to sell to people, how does your blending process start? How does it work? Are there goals when you go in there? Are you just hunting for the best barrels to put together? Does it vary?
How the hell do you guys do it? I have no idea. I just repeated what he said, but just more idiotically.
I'm going to go first because I think I'm very simple, and I know that they have a more probably intricate way of doing their blending. So I'll get my quick, simple way out of it. I basically use a spreadsheet, and I monitor all of ours through a spreadsheet. I kind of earmark things that, just based on experience, what I'm looking for. Again, I kind of point to that blurred bullseye that I talked about earlier where, we have a specific blend goal as far as age goes, but not necessarily, but we're layering, older casts with younger casts to reach that goal. It's not just pulling all the casts that are there. So I usually am kind of flipping through, the spreadsheet, looking at what casts would fit the bill. And then Kyle, our production manager, and I usually sit down and then we'll taste through it and we'll get some other feedback from some other people and kind of take it from there. So it's nothing crazy. We're kind of just making sure sensory that it fits the bill, what we're looking for. If it doesn't, which has happened a couple times, then we kind of go back to the drawing board and look and see if we got anything else that we think might. So that's as crazy as we get with our blending.
Well, when do you start tasting stuff? Like how long after it's in the barrel do you start?
So early on, when we didn't have a ton of casts and we weren't filling as many and we weren't so busy, it was trying to taste casts at 3 months, and that was purely for sensory, just to see did we make a clean beer and put it in cask, or is it starting to spoil? Is there any off flavors? We had limited space, especially back then, so it was like if it starts tasting bad, get it out of there, and we'll just focus on getting some new stuff. Lately, though, it's usually not until probably after a year, and kind of as we're getting closer, within a couple months of kind of thinking of pulling those casks, and we'll kind of do a sensory, see where it's aging. We've only had two casks that we've done that we decided not to pull because they weren't where we wanted them, and they actually ended up being really good casks. Some of the casks that are older is like 40 months right now, and they turned better. And I know that's part on the outline that I saw was kind of if we do that, and that's the only time that we've done it, and we haven't even actually finished that project yet. But yeah, that's how we do things over at Phase 3.
I guess looks like we're going in ascending order of volume. It's a revolution in the middle
vibes,
here.
Right? You're just like this.
Yeah,
this
mostly
barrel
vibe.
looks cool.
You nailed it. I'm done. I
On
yield
the
my
outside.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we
Fuck that barrel.
So at Rev, we turn every kind of batch or grouping of barrels into lots. So it's across batches, and then we subdivide across a variety of barrels filled. So it could be a batch of barley wine that's 40 oak barrels filled, or it could be 150 oak barrels filled from that same batch, that same fermenter. Across that batch, we could fill 1 to 8 different varieties of spirit barrels. So we'll break across batches and across barrel variety. We'll turn them all into lots. And between 4 to 7 months, I'd say roughly, after the barrels have been filled, we can expect the ABVs to be more or less stable as a result of extracting whatever booze has been sequestered in the oak for us, and we'll run it through the alkalizer in the lab. It tells us the sugar concentration as well as the ABV, and just like it's much easier to drink a pint of Jack Daniels if you make whiskey sours than if you just sip it out of the bottle. It's all about the balance. What's balancing the alcohol? It's the hydrophobia versus the hydrophilic component. So it's sugar versus alcohol. We call that balance value. So we establish a target balance value for every single barrel-aged beer. We tasted back a couple years ago. The brewers got together and we tasted every beer for 2 vintages, and we tasted D-Star side by side.
When you say every beer for 2 vintages, what do you mean by that?
I'm sorry, every beer within the Deepwood series that we packaged. So all 2 years worth of D-Star, 2 years worth of Straight Jacket, 2 years worth of Rye Way to Heaven, all the main base beers. And we established this relationship between sugar and alcohol, which again we call balance value. And we said, okay, it's this ABV and this degrees Plato, finishing gravity post barrel. And we said, do we like this to be a little bit boozier, or do we want this to be a little bit sweeter? We kind of loosely defined the perfect expression of that beer as a matter of balance and how easy it is to drink. Barrels are going to come to us in different wetnesses. Sometimes we get, again, 1 ABV from barrel aging, and sometimes we can flirt with 4. And if you put the same beer into varying barrels, you're going to have very different outcomes on the back end. So knowing this, we intentionally differentiate or diversify the barrels that we're filling per batch, not only to spread the risk, but just kind of spread our wings. And we said, okay, is the perfect expression of D-Star a little bit sweeter than this, or is it a little bit boozier and oakier than this? And we established a target balance value. So now we produce very sweet, very dry, and we blend them back to the what we think is the appropriate relationship between sugar and alcohol, so that if D-Star or Straight Jacket is 13 ABV one year and 16% the next year, it's still you can still identify it as that beer. It's got the right amount of sugar to balance that amount of alcohol. Of course, there's oak, which is an oak tannin, which plays on the same team as alcohol, which is very difficult and expensive to quantify. So that's still something we can't control other than like by picking very old or very young barrels, but it gets us in the ballpark. So after a couple of months of aging, the ABV and sugar is more or less stabilized in barrels. We'll sample a representative number of each lot. So maybe it's 4 to 10 barrels within each lot. And then we have a sugar and alcohol value for both of those. And then we say, okay, we need to release 112 barrels of barley wine. We have 18 lots of barley wine to make this 112 or whatever I said barrels to sell. And now we want to make sure that we have the correct ratio of sugar and alcohol as a balancing factor. And then we get into the age of the sugars, in which we call the MCVM, or malt complexity value expressed in months, which is the average age of the sugars therein in the blend. And higher numbers are more raisiny and date and that kind of stuff, especially in the paler beers. It's very complicated to say in a podcast, but we have spreadsheets, and we're planning for this when we order barrels and when I order sugar concentrations from the brew house.
Wow, I thought it was going to be a complex system, but I guess not.
Just vibes, like I said.
Right, you were right. You were going to say something, Mike?
So your entire blending process seems analytical and data-driven. There's no like organoleptic.
Oh, no. That gets us to the ballpark. Now we're just in the neighborhood we want to be in with no surprises. The days leading up to the actual blending, when we're pushing the barrels together into a single tank, Victor, my partner in all things barrel cellar person and barrel specialist, and Jim Seaback, our brewmaster, we will taste every single barrel going into a blend, and we'll identify the leading and supporting flavors and aromatics, as well as the structure, or like the relationship of sugar and oak tannin and alcohol. We're kind of balancing the hydrophilic and hydrophobic tendencies of each barrel, and making note of that. And we say, okay, we're going to grab a pH and a bit of sensory on every single barrel to make sure that the barrels we didn't sample mid-season are not infected, and we're not going to be bringing a bad barrel into the blend and then ruining the rest of it. But then once we get them all blended together, we give the tank a stir, and we make sure it's homogenized, and then we smell, test, and we assess with sensory. And if it's as the brewer intended, go us, and it's ready to get crashed, fined, centrifuged, and pasteurized before packaging. If it's not, then it's time to pull some volume out and put a corrective volume in. Maybe it's something a little bit older and oakier and more concentrated. Maybe it's something a little bit younger and sweeter. If it's too hydrophobic, if there's too much oak going on, that's the case. VSOJ 2021, on paper, we made it more or less the same alcohol and sugar relationship as the first VSOJ that we canned in 2018. But because the first one was a year and a half and a 2.5 year component, the second one in 2021 was a 1, 2, 2.5, and 5 year component. The 5 year component was so loud, even as a quarter of the blend. Once we put it together on paper, it worked. But when we put it in the tank, it was so oaky and so concentrated, it was hardly even pleasant to drink, let alone being VSOJ. So we pulled 8 barrels of beer out of that blend, and then put in 8 barrels to replace the volume of the youngest, sweetest barley wine we had in inventory, to deaden the concentration, the oxidation, and the extractive things that we got from that super loud 5 year component. So yeah, the balance value and everything is just to get us to the ballpark, but we still taste and smell and assess everything once it's blended, and then we can make corrective measures from there if we want.
What do you do with the beer you pull out?
That super oaky stuff went into Straitjacket that year, which, VSOJ was probably a 40 oak barrel blend. We pulled out 8 barrels and we put it into something that was about 150 barrels. So it just added to the base of Straitjacket that year. So we saved everything we extracted, everything we oxidized, everything we concentrated through evaporation. We still got to drink, and it went into regular old Straitjacket.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. ROSJ.
ROSJ, as the kids call it, yes.
Yeah. So you being in kind of a big but not massive brewery, Marty. So for any of the barrel program, are you trying to hit a flavor target, or is it is that target like, the a little pinpoint that you're trying to get as close to as this is what, pick Rye, whatever, like this is what that is, or is it like this is conceptually what Rye is, and from year to year I'm just going to try to like nail like as hard as I can this concept of what I think this beer is. Does that make sense? Like, are you trying to hit something, or are you trying to make the best damn beer that you can that kind of fits the general mold of that brand?
That's an excellent question. You phrased it perfectly, and yeah, definitely the latter. These are vintage products, and we want them to present themselves as themselves. But just like you or myself or anybody in this room or anybody listening, some of us are trying to better ourselves. Some of us are just trying to coast and enjoy a good time. My approach to the Deepwood program is that consistency is the enemy of improvement. We are not done getting better. And as long as I have anything to say, as long as Jim has anything to say, as long as Victor has anything to say, the rest of the brew team, the package team and everybody, this is a huge team effort. We want to improve all the time. And we've only been doing this. The Deepwood program is younger than Revolution itself. We're talking about 10, 11 years at this point. We are not done getting better. And I don't think, if I had my say, we'll never be done getting better. And we have to react to the marketplace. This is a business after all. I'm not doing it for free. I'd like to eat and have vacation and 401k and all that kind of good stuff. I would love if everybody just wanted to drink French Oak Helles, and I'd be happy to transition to that as early as tomorrow. But for right now, we're in the business of making the most expressive and concentrated beer flavors that we possibly can. But what we want to do is do it with balance and finesse, and traditional methods and ingredients as much as possible. So these metrics, this balance value, the malt complexity value expressed in months, yada, 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 all these analytics, they're
I
there.
love your terminology.
They are
It's
there.
awesome.
Thank you. They're there to get us in the ballpark. And then after that, us as craftsmen and scientists, and if somebody figures themselves an artist, artistry as well. But we need
Artisans,
to get,
baby.
we need to get in the ballpark first, and good data, got us to the moon. It can sure as shit make a good barley wine.
Thank you, Mike.
All
All
right.
right,
Spreadsheets, Mike.
That's a tough one to follow.
one to follow. But how do the big boys do it, man?
It's
do you
so
do it?
when I got to Goose in 2011, of course, Bourbon County. We're talking about Bourbon County Stout. Of course, we do a lot of other barrel-aged beers, but of course, that's what we're known for. That beer was already nearly 20 years in the market at that point. So, I first came to Goose as a brewer, brewed it in the brew house, then went to the cellar, dealt with it in the cellar, then had to deal with the barrels. And as I mentioned, the barrels were 8+ year old at that time. To the age of that was our minimum standard for barrels. So our goal with a beer that's so well known and so well loved was, as I said earlier, don't beep it up, Serge. Just carry the torch the best we know possible. Totally agree, of course, with Marty's philosophy. We have to constantly improve. Little inside baseball, for about 6 months, I was circa 2013, 2014, I was on a project to develop a custom malt extract, going back to malt extracts, for Bourbon County Stout. And
Why?
To make the process more efficient. It would not compromise quality, but we needed to figure out, we've got a 50-barrel brew house, and there was no real means to upgrade that into something larger. We wanted to produce more wort at a relatively faster pace. This was a project in theory. Then president of the company found out about this after 6 months and scrapped it and said, we can never have Bourbon County Stout even be perceived to be a shortcut. Like you can't use malt extract in Bourbon County Stout. So this is what led us down the path of the mash filter. Was we need to figure out a way to make more of this wort at the same quality using all malt, no malt extract. So this was basically a mandate, and that's what led us to the mash filter. Mash filter, and hopefully I'll come around to the whole process here, but the mash filter was a period of adjustment where we had to go through on the brew house side, which a year later we had to figure out how those changes affected the beer. Of course, we knew
the insane extract that you get from a mash filter.
There were a lot of learnings. I think in a very basic sense, we felt like for maybe a year there we were a little roast forward, and so we got a little leaner. Our RDF, real degree of fermentation, went up, meaning our sugar content.
What years
went down.
are these that you're talking about?
It's probably 2017 ish. So we made some adjustments to the recipe to bring back more body and sweetness, basically to like previous levels. We're not talking about huge variances, but ones that we perceive. Not even getting into the current era of these the thick with 2C boys, but like just Bourbon County, original. So consistency in a barrel aged beer, as Marty said. We've got a very broad profile. So we use Draft Lab for taste panel. I don't know if you guys do, but we find it a very good tool. And the amount of descriptors for Bourbon County Stout are vast. So there's a broad profile. So we need to hit a mark that from a consumer, our expectation, a consumer expectation is going to be Bourbon County Stout, but it's a barrel aged beer. As Marty said, it's a vintage beer. I totally agree with that. There's going to be variation.
I want it to change every year, personally.
Temperature. We haven't even talked about temperature, but we don't temperature control our warehouse. And it's not like it was when it was across the street from Fulton, which was really exposed to the elements, but it's still, we probably swing between 45 and nearly 80 degrees Fahrenheit in that warehouse, the high and low points of the year. And that's part of the reason originally Bourbon County Stout was at least 8 months in the barrel. These days we're shooting with the thousands of barrels that we're trying to deal with. It comes down to hitting your general specs in the brew house all the way through fermentation, and we centrifuge pre-barrel, getting the best quality barrels as we already went through, going and make sure your barrel as the ingredient is locked up, then getting it in the barrel, and we're lots as well, and it's 200-day checks for micro, pH. They'll do some planing, PCR, and sensory at 200 days. And that's just that early indication of, is something not quite right? And, of course, those would get basically set aside if there's any issue. Our average age for Bourbon County Stout, I'm just talking about original here, has varied over the years. I think the last couple of years we've been about 11 and a half to 12 months average age. Now, we're brewing and filling barrels 9 months of the year. We're emptying 3 months of the year. So, of course, you've got a lot of different there. You've got a lot of different factors of age going into the barrel. So, we're minimum 8 months in the barrel, and that's just based on, again, you were there tasting it. You tasted the fresh, the 4 month, and the basically 8 month. And the 8 month is where we feel like one of the benefits of having a recipe that's been brewed for so long and been scrutinized and analyzed for so long is that there's a long history, and so both as far as expectations, but as far as sensory, and we start to see that the ester profile start to kind of diminish at like maybe the 2-3 month mark, where the bourbon starts to make a mark, but it really is just kind of a jagged piece. 8 months is where we feel like, okay, I feel like we're starting to get close. At close to 12 months, we're starting to get some of those nutty oxidative characters that we really feel like and I think some of those like cherry notes we talked about with the Munich, cherry, blackberry, almond, all hallmark characters. It's not just chocolate. It's not just vanilla. It's not just coconut. It's got to be more than that. Oxidation is, and these guys, of course, have already said it, and they live by it, is oxidation is part of the flavor profile of these beers. And so in the environment that's very consistent, we hit our specs, our barrels are good quality. We feel that at an average age of 11.5 to 12 months, we're hitting the mark for where we want to be. Of course, we're tasting along the way. We're probably tasting 20% of the barrels at 200 days. It's a lot of barrels, but when we're talking about thousands of barrels, it's a very different program than what most brewers are going to be dealing with.
Sure.
Of course, our goal is to deliver a fantastic beer, and that's what all of us are here to do. That's what has worked for us. We're not manipulating, brewhouse recipes like Marty is, and I don't think a lot of brewers are. It's absolutely fascinating stuff, and I really applaud it. It's amazing that what you're doing. For us, it's a different set of factors, and again, what I poured out of the crowler earlier was not brewhouse recipe changes. Well, it was, but really more just kind of a blending to a very small batch blending, something that we don't get to do very often. And that I think as brewers makes us really excited, is to take 4 different recipes, 3 or 4 different barrels, 18 to 36 months, and then just pick what fits. Like, what's that sweetness? What's that alcohol? I actually don't know we didn't even run numbers on this yet, the phys chem. So my guess is it's around 16% alcohol. So that's it in a nutshell. It's we, just like all of us, we're trying to make the best quality product. It's very sensory driven, also very data driven. But I agree with Marty. We're constantly trying to improve process. Having gone through the nightmare of 2015, where we had to basically break it down and rebuild it, it was hell for a year, but I feel like we came out of that so much better as a brewery. We weren't pasteurizing before that.
Right.
We were reusing barrels before that. Not for Bourbon County Stout, but for our barley wine and some other brands, we would go from beer to beer, and we know that's a very different environment than a high proof ethanol, rich barrel with very low sweetness. So
interesting. Yeah, I mean, just between just the 3 people here, wasn't intended this way, but I mean, just with the barrel program and how you have to blend it, just completely different set of parameters and requirements, and it's fascinating. Where to now? Are we done? There's nothing else to say about barrel aged beers. I think we've said it all.
Yeah.
Marty
goes, play that music.
Marty
Serge.
goes on vibes, right?
Yeah, Marty, pure vibes.
We knew that though.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Since the 3 of us are in the room, and kind of curious, like your take on it. But if you guys ever ran across a barrel, or how often, I guess, do you guys run across one barrel if you're doing a tasting? You're like, this is the shit. This is the best barrel that we've tasted today, or in the last year, 2 years. Like, this stands out. 2-part question: do you guys do anything with that barrel? Do you set it aside and do a single barrel with it? Versus how many times that you taste through all these barrels, put them all together, and the sum is so much better than all those single individual barrels. For me, very rarely do I come across a barrel that stands out to me that ends up being like, damn, that one barrel that we put in here
too good to blend, almost, you mean?
Was too good. Like, we shouldn't have put it in here. It would have stood really well on its own. Versus usually the outcome is that we blend and we find that the whole blend just turned into like this magical sort of thing. I'm curious, like, what your guys is
like a single note versus a chord.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah.
And also, before they answer, because I like to just butt in, and the one person that this was not asked to will answer first.
I wasn't asked to.
Well, but you at least have done it before. I've not.
It's a long time.
It's also interesting because I'm curious about, like, it might be like more of a lamentation for you, Mike Siegel, because can you even do something with that one beautiful barrel versus you, Sean, who can take advantage of it? It's kind of like a nice opportunity for you. But anyway,
we've done it. We've got a tap room like every other brewery. So we've pulled off single casks. I've had forgotten barrels, the Siegel forgotten barrels that end up being 4-year 4 years old that were like some project that I completely forgot about, wasn't on paper. And
passionate about 4 years ago. But
yeah. And so those will tend to go to, we call them barrel selects, and we'll put them in the tap room as a special offering. We're working on a different route to market for that, to drop a little hint, but I think that's fun. I mean, obviously the bourbon world is all about barrel picks, and I mean, you guys are already doing it. It sounds like so. Other breweries, I know Microphone's doing it, and I don't know. Are you doing single barrel?
We've really just been doing it with a few times that we've done it with the retail partners and stuff, where they do a single barrel and bring it in, age it for 25, 30 months, and do it that way. But not too often. Not as much as maybe we could or should.
Sure. So that's an opportunity, just to quote unquote commercialize it. But for now, we haven't. It's just been, let's put it through the pilot brewery, and keg it off and serve it to loving beer lovers.
At Revolution, we have 4 to 5 barrel age release parties a year. We have opportunities between them as well to drop single barrels and draft variants, but typically draft variants are going to be landing at these big releases. We call them money barrels if we've got a single barrel that's expressing itself particularly attractively. Because we do very sweet and very dry versions of everything and then bring them back together to make a concert, the money barrels have become more rare over the years. However, as we do these double barrel projects, we do the first blending into a tank and then refill fresh barrels. So now we have, rather than 12 components that we then have to manage, we have one component to manage. And on these double barrel situations, like Form of the Destructor, which was a single barrel pick, a money barrel as we call it, of the 2020 batch of double barrel VSOD out of a Weller barrel, it was already perfectly balanced for our estimation. And there was one barrel that I can't recall the number, but it had everything we wanted. And sometimes it's a complete beer. Oftentimes it's just a vanilla bomb or a coconut bomb, and it's an opportunity not only to drink a good beer that you can't drink anywhere else, but it's a great educational tool for the consumer to come into our tap room and see just what flavors, aromatics, and intensities are possible through barreling and not barreling with adjuncting. And this was educated by various trips to Buellton, California, to Firestone Walker's Barrel Works, where they had components of blends. Some of the best wild and sour beers I've ever had were at Barrel Works. They were Feral Vinifera, Feral One, all these, to me, classic barrel-aged sours, but they'd have these components that weren't necessarily great on their own, like cowbell. Their acid component. If something is really acidic, they might not use a lot of it in a particular blend, but if they have another blend that is kind of lacking in acid, they've got this component cowbell that they can just add, like, hey, this is great, but it needs more cowbell. That's exactly right. So they'll have cowbell on, which is just, a strongly acidic beer. And it's not necessarily meant to be its own complete, compelling, fantastic, amazing beer. But it's an opportunity to educate the consumer. And so many people who are coming to your brewery on purpose, and that's the case in Buellton, California. A lot more people travel to that brewery than live in that town for their liberations. And the same is true on Kedzie Avenue. We don't have a whole lot of foot traffic. If you're there at a barrel age release, you're there on purpose. You don't just show up and go, oh, there's a giant fucking barrel release happening right now. We want an opportunity to educate people just what is possible from the right barrel. And it doesn't happen often, and it's not always the perfect barrel, but sometimes it's just an extreme communication from barrel to consumer, and it's a great way to educate people just what is possible and what we're dealing with as kind of raw materials before we get blending.
Mike, where would you like to go from here?
I think we should talk about adjuncting. Now that you've made this blend, or maybe before you make the blend, you have an idea of what you're doing, but how do you decide which adjuncts for which beers, and how do you go about then processing that? Yeah, Marty raised his hand.
Doug usually tells me what adjuncts to put into a beer.
Got it.
Hey, Doug, what's going on?
The beer aficionado himself.
Yeah, I'm just goofing.
So coconut from all the analytics, just put more coconut in it.
From speaking selfishly, this is just Marty Scott saying, I like adjuncts that represent flavors and aromatics that are already present in barrels. Or if we're going to fruit something, I like something that monks have been using, or Trappist breweries or lambic producers. I want something with a track record in brewing. I worship traditional methods and ingredients. Coffee is something we've specialized in, and it's not 200 years of tradition of putting coffee in beers, but it's a proven and established ingredient.
How do you go about adding coffee to beers?
Ooh, it's very simple. It didn't used to be. We have
It's funny. We also had Laffler was in here at the tap room earlier, which is, was he was the steward of Bourbon County for the first year of coffee, I believe. So
Yeah.
Just kind of
John
funny.
and I worked together for, I don't know, a year and a half maybe.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I don't know why.
That's That's how I got into making 40 barrels of cold brew coffee every year.
Right,
for many years.
exactly.
The actual coffee was 40 barrels.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a different podcast.
Yes.
As far as Revolution is concerned in coffee extraction, we have a process we refer to as selective extraction. I'm not going to elucidate absolutely everything. Some things have to remain sacred. But if you don't extract green pepper into your beer will never present with green pepper. And so these pyrazines, you select for coffee that doesn't contain it, and then you extract to avoid getting any of that if it's in there. I'll leave it like this: the best sensory experience you can have with a bag of coffee is a freshly roasted bag that you cut open and you stick your nose into. You didn't have to extract that. The coffee is giving the atmosphere that. It's volatile. Some of the other components, it's why cutting into a bag is more pleasant than chewing on a coffee bean, right? So how do you go about
hop, right?
Just like a hop. Hops can be over-extracted. Malt can be over-extracted. Same too with coffee. So many people want to recirculate on ground coffee for a week to get their money's worth, but they've gotten everything good out of that coffee much quicker than that, and probably without grinding or recirculation. And that's all I have to say about that.
All right, then. So that's about adjuncts. Sean, you are of I don't know if it's third wave or whatever, but you're definitely of the ilk where you've probably done more concentrations of adjuncts within a stout, and also well, that's not true because we have Mike Siegel here as well.
Right.
Sorry. But Mike, I'm sorry, but Sean, yeah, like what is your approach to adjuncts and combining adjuncts and stuff like that?
So I'm a little bit in the, so I kind of like in this split of generations of brewers, and I try to hold on to my traditional training and the brewers who trained me, who were, to me, pioneers in the craft beer, brewing in the 90s and early 2000s and stuff like that, before craft beer boom really happened. And I really hold on to that. I try to, but I also know that we pointed out it's a business. We got to sell the beer. People have to enjoy the beer. So we definitely dabble and get a little weird sometimes, but I definitely try to keep us dialed in and make sure that we're making smart decisions and stuff like that. So our approach is always, though, if we say something's in a beer, we tend to hit you over the head with it. That was very much how it was like in the early, I'd say between 2010, 2015, maybe even before just 2020 actually.
You don't want someone to taste it and be like, I don't taste the
Coconut.
coconut. Yeah,
Hazelnut.
whatever.
100%.
Hazelnut. Yeah,
and that,
whatever.
And that was always like the slap in the face. It was like we sat there and we put coconut in something or whatever.
And they spent all day putting it in or
exactly.
something like that.
And
yeah.
then people are like, I don't get it. And you're like, dude, it's all over the beer.
12 pounds per barrel of coconut.
So, how do you know what we do?
I've done it.
No, but it's like that was always the slap in the face. So we definitely like leaned into that. It was like clobbering you over the head. But like I pointed out earlier, as far as like the sweetness and that stuff, we're slowly going to trend back down and try to find that balance because I think people are finally understanding what the beer is all about. But that was always the approach. I like working with just about any adjunct, but to kind of to Marty's point, I like to use adjuncts that are complementary to flavors already found in the yeast profile, in the malt profile, in the barrel profile. I am not and that's probably honestly 90%, 95% of the adjuncts that I've used are complementary adjuncts. There's sometimes where, we get a little weird and we'll do strawberry, and very rarely do we find strawberry in our tasting, of barrel-aged beer sometimes, but not usually. It's not a very prominent one, or
But
bananas
like
a little bit.
chocolate-dipped strawberries are kind of like a classic combination, at least.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it's...
So I try to find like that is like, I remember back in the day, for me, it was looking at truffles. I would go on chocolate websites type of thing, and I would scroll through and see like what flavor combos were working with truffles, hazelnut, coffee, coconut, stuff like that.
I got it.
And kind of
yeah.
just be like, oh, those sound great. That's a win. Like for sure, it's a W. We're gonna use that, and we're gonna do it. And usually it was. But yeah, I know I'm gonna further this. I know part of the outline referenced some like extracts and stuff. I shouldn't even be talking about this, but we're not afraid of extracts if they are the superior product. So we do use we've used, I can think of 2 extracts that and I'm only gonna stick to barrel aged spirit beers that we do. So other beers kind of off the table. But for barrel aged beer, we try to use premium product, real raw raw ingredients, and use them to incorporate whatever flavor we're going for. Occasionally, though, we're going for a flavor that is just unobtainable, or I think less superior than using an extract.
Sure.
And we will do tasting panels. We'll try this flavoring, this real ingredient, and we'll come to the consensus that is just like, well, if that's the flavor profile we want, then this produced the best representation of that flavor.
Sure.
So
is there a trend for like what types of flavors or what types of ingredients are harder to extract in the natural form versus better in the extract form?
Yeah, I'm sure there's
I won't speak under the ones that we have used. Leave that up to the imagination of the listener here. And I don't want to spoil, have someone's favorite book be spoiled by me saying something, silly, and they're like, "Oh, really? That's a flavoring." Again, because I think that's a marketing component. People will buy into that, and I think given the chance to taste it blindly, not knowing it's a superior product, trust me, we've tried real stuff and not real stuff, and if we do use it, it's for a reason. It's not to cut a corner. But the one thing I will not use for a flavoring, so kind of the opposite of your question.
Nice.
Is
well done.
Is coconut. That's one thing we do not use extract. Every extract I've ever tried and to try in a beer always comes across as suntan lotion. I will not use a coconut flavoring. We only use real coconut.
I found the nut extracts, like, just you cannot get that flavor of an almond. Nobody puts real almond in, which is why I'm using it as an example. But like,
some people might.
I mean, it's true. But like, almonds,
hazelnuts, peanut butter.
Yeah,
it's
like all that
that
stuff. It's so hard
without extracting a bunch of fat.
Well, just even like even when
Never
you're
say
eating, right? Even when you're eating like a dessert that's just like loaded with almonds, and then you just get a dab of almond extract from McCormick. I mean, it's just like night and day. Like, oh, that's just such a concentrated almond flavor. That's what I've noticed is like there's certain things that like are just now I'm gonna say I almost said industry standards, but it's like at home baking standards.
It goes back to knowing your ingredients, just like Sean's saying. You got to know it's a tool like anything else. And as somebody who's overseen more adjuncts added to barrel-aged stout than
anybody,
just about anybody, probably.
Not just about than anybody.
I mean, for instance, we added 10,000 pounds of Black Mission figs to our most prized beer. We have a 400 barrel horizontal tank at the barrel warehouse. We loaded it up over the course of a whole day with 10,000 pounds of Black Mission figs. It ran about 40 feet, 3 feet deep. We then put the beer on top of that, about 300 barrels of the beer, and then gently recirculated that for about 3 weeks until we got what we wanted. But we felt like
3 weeks.
Where's the fig?
Yeah, right. I don't get any fig, bro. I get no Black Mission fig in this.
You only had 5 tons.
This is the best Black Mission fig beer I've ever had. I don't taste any of it. 2.5 stars.
So we also added 7,000 pounds of roasted and sliced almonds to a beer last year. But you know what? Nuts
7,000.
Nuts are very volatile.
Right.
As these guys probably know, if you ever worked with coconut or any type of nut, really, the compounds are very volatile. So that beer may taste fantastic in the bright tank, and even in packaging, but a month later, 2 months later,
boom, boom, boom.
you have to know where that profile is going to be, whatever your expected profile change is. Every time we've used coconut or almonds or pecans or whatnot, the volatile oils just really change quickly. Whereas you use cassia bark and it's like
gets
like
crazier.
The freaking cockroach
goes off
of adjuncts that never go away, or berry fruit with their antioxidants. And so, again, we've made, as somebody said on our brand team, that we made 65 variants, and most of those have been, in my time there, adjunct variants. And I take a lot of pride in the work. Our goal is it's a little bit different than what we were there probably 8 years ago with this. Like, this was what Greg instilled in me, is like, work with resonant consonant flavors, the vanilla, the chocolate, the caramel, the coffee. So look at the early variants of Bourbon County Stout. But we were pushing ourselves to, and I think the consumers were pushing us to bring the new news and not redo vanilla every year, not redo coffee every year. Not although we did coffee for a number of years. Our goal now is to not do the same thing every year, but bring new news. And to use the old Happy Days phrase, never jump the shark. And meaning like, and I'm sure there's people out there that think we have, there's people that thought when we made a beer with black tea, Earl Grey tea, and honey that, they never wanted to see us ever again.
I love
that beer.
I like that beer.
That was one of my favorite variants you've made.
We're not afraid to be polarizing is where I'm going. Is
you
like,
can't be great if you're not polarizing.
Vanilla and coconut
trying.
in coffee tend to be these, everybody loves them. Although some people don't like coconut, some people do. You know what I mean? Like they resonate with a wide.
Sure.
We're not all the time, but we're willing to be polarizing in order to push ourselves and I think the expectations from the beer lovers that buy these beers forward. When we use citrus, we did Midnight Orange with cocoa nibs and orange, and it's that chocolate orange thing. Mm-hmm. And it's all about what all of us have been saying tonight is finding the balance of those ingredients, finding the best quality ingredients that work with the beer and finding the balance. Conceptually, it's very tough. You want to push yourself to do something. We want to push ourselves to do something new that isn't just like new for being new, but it really works. It whether it's inspired by a bourbon cocktail or a dessert or any of those flavor profiles that are like 1 or 2 layers removed from the expected profile of your beer. So that's how we approach it.
Right. I think it's. What are you looking at, Mike?
Marty's used adjuncts too.
Yeah, I didn't.
Oh yeah, you did talk about the strawberry. I was most interested in strawberry straight jacket. How do you introduce sugar into something like that at that level and make sure it fits into your your matrix, and then we can close it out. But that was one beer that I thought existed outside of
Strawberry Jacket. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
You're welcome.
longed in the early days of Straight Jacket when it was still good beer in, good beer out. Especially, we got a lot of strawberry Twizzlers. Was a common sensory note that we got when we were sampling barrels, and that was it was kind of a defining aromatic in the first couple of years of Straight Jacket, and we hadn't had a whole lot of strawberry adjuncted beers. We had done cherry, we had done coffee, we had done all the hallmarks that we've already discussed. But here was a kind of an outlier as far as a lot of commercial examples, but it was still a complementary flavor to us. So we decided to go for it. And for us, we just want to make sure the more sugar you have in an adjunct, the more we feel, because we still want to present a kind of dry, drinkable beer. You have to leave a hole for that. So that's where, blending and cheating towards or favoring the drier components in a blend can leave a hole for unfermented sugary adjuncts. So strawberry, we figured out the acidity and the sugar concentration, and then we blended Straight Jacket that would leave a hole for the strawberry to come in and not make it cloyingly sweet or too acidic or anything else. So it was, dynamic aging and thoughtful blending that started with a spreadsheet and just bench topping some strawberry puree, spinning out the solids and pulling off the juice, adding it to a blend on the laboratory bench top and saying this is, how many barrels of how many lots are going to come into the blend, and then how much of this strawberry juice is going to go in, and then how much of that strawberry pulp is going to precipitate out and not become beer. So we order the right amount of fruit, not too much, not too little, to be expressive and to not over or undershoot our volume. And there were rakes that we walked into. These are challenges, and a lot of times it's successful as far as the sensory is concerned, but maybe we lose our ass on volume and we didn't factor in the pulp, or maybe we over factor in the pulp and we're really long on volume. But the sensory is always first and foremost. Then as to tie into like extracts or not to use extracts. In the Deepwood program, we don't use any extracts. Sometimes I wish, sometimes the beers could be better. The higher sugar concentration of your natural adjunct, we're talking maple, honey, stuff like that, they're really simple sugars. These are one chain length sugars that hit right on the front of your tongue. Whereas maltose, a slightly more complex sugar, that's what we call that mid-palate sweetness. We want to make sure that a barley wine hits like a barley wine and not like a honey wine, not like a maple wine. And those are rakes that we've walked into because we don't want it to be cloying necessarily, but then we're pairing super sugary adjuncts. The only way we can keep it balanced is to use super dry barley wine. And what we did kind of mistakenly in the last couple of years is we were using enzymes to create these super dry components. So even all the unfermented sugar was still very simple. So when all the sweetness is single chain length sugars, that sweetness hits you right up front. And even if, like in the case of Strawberry Jacket, after the unfermented fruit is added, the blend is still drier than regular old Straight Jacket chemically. You run it through the alkalizer or Anton Par in the lab. Regular old Straight Jacket, again, it's a relationship of sugar and alcohol, but typically Straight Jacket is about 7 to 7.5 degrees Plato finishing fully blended. Strawberry Jacket is like 5 degrees Plato.
So you have people telling you like, this beer's so sweet, and you're like, no, I can show you.
Yeah, exactly.
Scientifically, technically, no, but also
chemically,
right.
Exactly. But whose palate is wrong? No one's.
Right.
So chemically, there is less sugar in some of these high sugar adjunct barley wine stouts and stuff that Revolution has produced in the past, recently even. but paired with these drier components that were dry because of enzymatic activity that we added.
Sure.
All that sugar hits you up front, and it leaves nothing for that mid palate. So it winds up being this incomplete beer, even though we said, no, this is still a drier beer than the regular unfruited version. It presents as sweeter, and nobody's palate is wrong.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll also make a little comment that several knowing nods from Mike Siegel while you were talking. I don't know exactly about what, but it seemed like a few things struck a chord with him as well. He was just giving yes. I think we've officially. I was talking with Serge just off mic very briefly, and I think we may have to go. This may have gone two-parter. I think I told before Sean Burns that this is going to be like a 90-minute thing, and then like here we are. So I apologize for that.
Volume 2.
Right. So I think we'll have to split that this
We
show
didn't even
into,
talk about
into
what type
two.
of racking wands people are using. Come on,
Oh my
Chris.
goodness!
I'm sure
Oh,
all of
my
us could do
goodness.
another 2 hours on adjuncts alone. I know I could. So.
Right.
Maybe that'll be its own podcast.
Right. That'll be the after the Patreon
Patreon
only
episode.
the Patreon only, which we've alluded to. One day we'll
Get
we'll
nude,
release
one
all
nude
of
from
those.
Chris and all of the adjunct talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the OnlyFans. Sorry.
The OnlyFans only. Yeah.
I want to add one thing. The first question asked was why barrel age, and I don't think I got my turn, and I was kind of stewing on it too and thinking about it. And my first answer I was going to say was, it reminds me of sort of like cheese making. You can make American cheese and be happy with it, slap it on a sandwich, or you can like do like 10-year, 15, 20-year aged cheddar. And I think that the answer would be the same if you asked that cheesemaker and you asked us. I think we'd all agree that, it's interesting to do it. It's timely to do it, and not a lot of not a lot of breweries have the patience to do it and have the know-how, I guess. But I really think it comes down to patience and just accessibility. That it's easier to make the American cheese versus making the 20-year cheddar. So that was kind of my reason why we do it. I think it's more interesting. It makes the product more interesting. You can't replicate it, to my knowledge. Tell me if I'm wrong. You can't replicate barrel aging through any other means of brewing or cellaring. And I
Shot
think
in
it
a
makes
beer
a
is
cool
pretty
product.
good. I don't know. Sorry. Didn't mean to step on your last couple words. I apologize.
No, you're good. That was it. I just wanted to get that out.
I appreciate that.
Well said.
Yeah. No, you can't. I mean, you cannot create these beers, in my experience, any other way.
Thought, effort, and time.
Yeah.
Thanks to a TTP loophole.
Idiots.
Yes. I think I'm calling it, Mike. I think I have to.
Quitter.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. But it's been awesome. Thank you guys so much. I want to thank all our guests. I'm going to go around the horn one more time to let everyone just have a final word if they have any. You don't have to. You can pull the Jerry Nelson. That's totally cool. That's fine. But I just wanted to thank everyone. I'll go in reverse seniority for the closing remarks. Sean, is there anything you would like to say in addition to the thing you just wanted to say before we get out of here?
No, not really. Again, I want to just thank you for having me on the show. Thought it was really fun. I haven't got to really talk to Marty, so it was great hearing his perspective on it. And I think you created a really cool panel here with kind of very small, like me, brewery that's not making a whole ton of barrel age stuff, but very passionate about it. And then middle all the way up to tens of thousands or whatever barrels is sitting over in the Goose Island warehouse.
Millions,
so.
I think they're up to.
Billions.
Tens of millions.
Billions of barrels.
It's getting bigger as we speak.
So-
Yeah, I think exponentially growing.
But thank you again. I appreciate it. It was very fun.
Oh, believe me, thank you.
Thank
I say
you.
that for all three of us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for listening, everybody. Motorhead is the greatest rock and roll band of all time.
You're wearing their hoodie right now, so that means he's telling the truth. Mike?
Well, I'm going to put a plug in for WFMT, Chicago's classical
Also
station.
wearing
Same vibe,
Also
same vibe.
wearing the shirt.
So, thanks, Chris and Mike and Serge.
course.
for having us. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. It's been great. Mike, would you like show out? Would you like to say anything before we get out of here?
No, I
Come on.
think we've made people listen to us enough for the day.
We're going to break it up into two. These are 2 short episodes. They want more.
Oh, well, then I got about an hour and a half to go. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
See you next time.
All right. We'll see you later, guys. So long.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, 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 again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, 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 again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again, 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 again.